Hello.
Hi, Michelle.
By the way, I'm sorry my hair looks crazy, but it looks crazy like naturally. I apologize. So
No problem. That's good. How are you doing today?
good. Can you hear me okay? I've got headphones if that will work better. I just whichever you prefer.
Yeah, I can hear you very well, loud and
Oh,
clear. So, welcome to the live stream. This is Critical African Thinkers. This is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is most factual and logically consistent. So, I'm bringing you onto the show today because I wanted to talk about the US educational system and especially how Black people perform in the educational system. It's sort of confusing to me as an outsider. I don't know if you know this, that I'm not in the US, I'm not a US citizen, I'm actually in Nigeria, but a lot of the things happening in the US actually is interesting to me. So I try to find out about these things. And one of the things that I find out to be much more interesting than many other things is the educational system and how there seem to be some sort of a gap.
I don't like that light. I'm testing the light. Sorry. There you go. I've been listening
Okay.
to you. So some sort of a gap between.
Yes, between academic achievements for Black people and, say, Asians and, say, white people. So I wanted to explore with you the educational system, how it is structured, first of all, how it is structured across board, maybe across state lines or maybe across the federation. Then
Mhm,
how what the standards are. Uh, the standards are they do they apply across all schools, or are there
mhm.
discrepancies in the standards? And also in terms of how the socioeconomic status of students, how it affects their performance in the educational system, and what are some of the root causes of this disparity between African American kids and their white or Asian counterparts, and what has been done to bridge this gap, and what can be done to bridge this gap. So these are some of the issues that I want to explore with you. So I hope
Okay.
we're good to go. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Can I make?
before we begin,
Mhm.
okay, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you said Asians and whites. Don't forget Hispanics. So I mean, in the Bay, in California,
Okay,
but nationwide, we have four large racial groups with the understanding that both Asians and Hispanics. I mean, and this is actually also true of African Americans because we have now a significant amount of people who've immigrated from Africa as well as African descendants of slaves. So we have two groups, and then Asian and Hispanic are both very large groups. But those are our four large categories. I just wanted to say so. And also, the cause is hotly disputed, so you're not going to get
okay,
answers
okay.
from me on causes. Okay, I'll give you some. Here's what people think stuff, but yes.
Okay, so that'll be fine as long as you tell me what people think. So it doesn't have to be, okay, this is what you think it is. But I do think
Mhm.
that people should be honest about these conversations, and this would go a long way to solve some of the issues. So I'd like you to just give us a brief introduction of yourself in terms of how you function in the educational system. I would have done that, but let me hear it from you. So,
Okay, well, yeah, so my name's Michele Kerr. I'm fairly unusual in that I am qualified to teach in three high school academic subjects: English, math, and social science, that is history and economics. I also have a career technical credential, which is you have to have significant professional expertise in one of several areas. Mine's in computing, in basically information systems and communications. With that credential, I teach engineering as a broad subject. So I'm unusual in that regard. I work in a Title I school, high school in the Bay Area, California. And a Title I is a federal definition of a school that has over 35% of the students qualifying for free and reduced lunch. That is poverty. You're living in poverty. So I teach predominantly low income kids. I think our school, it's not always the same, but our school's about one in every two students is low income. The Bay Area is unusual in that in many parts of America, the poor people live in one area and the rich people live in another. The Bay Area is socioeconomically quite diverse within a school. That doesn't say that there aren't many schools that are extremely, like only wealthy people, but we have a fair amount of schools that have parents who are quite well off, not necessarily rich, but, upper income professional, as well as very low income kids in the same school. That's not unusual in the Bay Area, and that is what I have in my school. I have been teaching. I'm about to start my 13th year. I'm a second career teacher, and before I was a teacher, I was a programmer, which is how I got my career technical education credential. Our school, and this is something you should always ask when you're talking to a teacher, you should always ask their demographics because it matters a lot. And our school is about 36% Asian, 35% Hispanic, about 20% white, and like about 5 to 10% African American. And we have a lot of our students are either immigrants or first generation, or what we call 1.5, meaning they came over here like when they were 4 or 5, and so they speak English fluently, but they're not technically a citizen. So that's an intro for me.
All right. So thank you very much for that intro. So we're good to go. So a follow-up question from your intro. When you say about 5 to 10% of your students, the demographic of your students are African Americans or Black people, is that reflective? Is that a number sort of closer to the population of Black people within the area in which you teach? Is it close to 5 to 10% of that area being of African American descent, or is there a disproportionate amount of other groups being represented in your school?
No, in fact, Fremont, the demographics of Fremont, last I checked, are something like 70% Asian. So if anything, Asians are underrepresented in our school. There's not like, for example, Oakland, which is one of the major, so Oakland, so the Bay Area, the big cities in Bay Area are San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. And Oakland used to be in 1990 or 1980, I think it was something like 60% African American. It's now about 30% African American. San Francisco's, again, roughly 8%. San Jose's 1 or 2%. And everything that's not one of those cities is one of the small cities in between. And I don't think any of them have a large African American population except West Richmond. I'm not sure what that is. There aren't many African Americans in the Bay Area. There's several reasons for it. One of the big ones is that a lot of the African Americans who owned homes when the property values went up, they sold out. This is going back, 20, 30 years. So the African American population in the Bay Area has been declining. So the African American population at this current school is larger than my previous school, which I worked at for 2 years. That school was 70% Hispanic, 28% white, and 1 or 2% Black. So you know what I'm saying? It can be less African American. They are the least populous demographic in this area.
Okay, so that makes sense. So my first question to you is just briefly lay out the U.S. educational system for me in very simple terms, how it is structured, the basic foundation.
Okay, yeah. So American education is very decentralized. That's the thing that anybody coming to America from any other country would notice instantly, is that we are decentralized. There is no federal. In fact, the federal government is not allowed to make dictates for education except they have money. And so they will a lot of times say, yeah, you can have this money, but here's what you have to do. So that's how they control it, because the federal government can make a lot of demands of state schools for equity, to make sure things are equal. And a lot of times those are what are called unfunded mandates, mean they make a declaration you have to do it, but they don't give you the money to do it. So the federal government has control over schools, over state schools, even though like the Constitution does not give them that power. And that's the power of the purse, because there are so many demands on American schools these days that they don't often have the money for it. So that moves it down to the states. By and large, states set standards. However, underneath the state, you have something called districts. And districts, that's called local control. And districts vary widely, both in socioeconomics and populations. And districts have a great deal of control over how they do things. So, in pretty much, and like for example, in France, and I'm just using this as an example because I've heard of it, but in France, if you walked into any public school in France, they're on any given day, they are teaching exactly the same thing for that day. Not in America. Not in America. We don't do that at all. Teachers have a tremendous amount of control over what they teach. It is in most states not allowed to tell teachers what they have to teach. So we hold a great deal of control. But we also have standards, and most teachers, particularly at the high school level, we try to cover the standards. But one of the things you mentioned is, are the standards the same in every school? Absolutely not. They aren't even the same in every classroom in many cases. Certainly in my school, I teach topics very differently than some of my colleagues do. And you would not say that we do the same. So American education has tremendous variability in it. And by the way, teachers say that's a feature, not a bug. Policymakers say it's a bug, not a feature. Take your pick.
Okay, don't you see that as problematic? I mean, if there's so much variability in the standards of teaching, how exactly are we supposed to have a uniform educational system where people kind of come out with similar potential in terms of what they have learned, in terms of the knowledge, that if it's solely if it's mostly at the discretion of the teachers, it isn't going to cause so much problem?
Okay. So a couple answers to that. First off, I'm a teacher. So I would say, no, I don't see a problem with it. Or to the extent I do, I would point to other problems. Certainly policymakers see that as a problem, but Americans are very, very fierce in their local control. There's a book you might want to read. I'll text you his name. It's Morgan Polikoff, Pollikoff. And he just recently wrote a book in which he kind of discovered, to his horror, that we had in America, we had something that was called national standards. It wasn't, but it was voluntary, but we all agreed to teach, the states all agreed to teach the same standard called Common Core. And so Common Core, by all accounts, failed to do what it was supposed to do. No surprise to teachers. And he was kind of horrified when he went and looked at it to find out that the teachers could kind of teach whatever they, there was no standardization, pretty much what you're saying. And you might find that book interesting to read, to kind of see how somebody who agrees with your take kind of presents it. It might be helpful to you. From my perspective, the thing that teachers will say is that there is a huge range in ability levels in America. And unlike other countries like, at a certain grade, like eighth grade, they're like, hey, you're working hard, but you don't have very good test scores, so you're going to go to vocational school. You're doing well, and you're going to go to high school and get academic stuff. And then once you're done with high school, there's more standards in college. America has none of that. And therefore, when you set standards and say everybody should learn this, and especially at the high school level where all of this is particularly important, the high school is like, I mean, I could have 4 to 5 years range and ability level in my classroom, and nobody has done anything wrong. In other words, it's not, oh, they weren't teaching them before now. It's just that ability levels being what they are, again, nothing to do with race, just normal ability levels. You get large ranges of ability, and it's impossible to say unless you failed huge amounts of students. Now, here is where you talked about the achievement gap. If you force teachers to hold to one given standard up here, right, and then teachers were forced to fail all the students who didn't get to that standard, that would lead to what we call in America disparate impact, meaning that sort of standard would disproportionately hurt low-income kids, African-American kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids, of certain like Hmong kids and different things, kids who just got here. We don't have standards for that. We kind of say, everybody has to do this. Well, reality is everybody can't do this. And this is where teachers make up their mind what they're going to teach to make sure that their kids are learning. And that, I think, is what most teachers want to do. The idea that teachers are just kind of casually throwing stuff out, in my experience, isn't true. Teachers have to decide how to teach. You've got this huge, you teach a math class in high school to kids who are still counting on their fingers. And so how do you teach it to them in a way that they'll learn it while still making sure that the more advanced kids in your class are learning as well? And that's a very difficult challenge. And this is not a challenge that is faced in other countries, because by and large, they'll just fail kids that don't meet that standard. They don't have that kind of same demand that Americans have. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, so yeah, we're still going to circle back to it. So let me still understand how much of control the teacher has. So if you want to put it in terms of percentage, the federal government, the state government, the districts, and the teachers, put it in terms of percentage, how to what level each of these categories determines what is being taught in the classrooms.
Okay.
Federal government, state government, districts.
Once the teacher has been assigned the class, pretty close to 100%. Now, the person who assigns the teacher's classes at the beginning of years is the principal. So if the principal says, I'm looking at, Michelle, and, she's supposed to be teaching at X level, and I'm, it's not working, like, I don't like it, then he could either, if it's in my first 2 years, he could fire me, or he could say, let's give Michelle a class with lower ability students or higher ability students, so she is not kind of teaching the way I like. So theoretically, a principal and administrator has control by assigning teachers to a particular class, because that's how they determine. They have complete control over that. As a teacher, I can't say, okay, next year I want to teach algebra 2 times. I want to teach 2 algebra 2 classes, 2 trigs classes, and a pre-calc. I can't do that. The principal has that control, and principals can, in many cases, if they're dissatisfied with teachers, they can control it that way. In practice, however, principals understand why teachers are doing this, and so they are not going to make that decision. Now, other than that, the state and the feds, from a teacher's perspective, can say what they like. Teachers are going to teach what they want. Now, let me make one thing clear. I'm a math teacher. If I'm teaching algebra 2, you're going to come in, you might think it's too easy or too hard, but it will look like algebra 2. Teachers, there's not a lot of problem. It's not like I come in and say, hey, you guys need to learn basic math, or you guys need to learn calculus or something like that. No, by and large, teachers will cover. But the difficulty level, the grading standard, even more important, wildly varies based on the teacher and the kids.
Oh, okay. I find this discretionary powers given the teachers problematic because just
everybody does, except Americans. We like it that way, especially American teachers. But I get it.
There's too many variability. There are so many factors that can come into that process when you leave it to the hands of just teachers themselves. So this brings me to my next question. Is there a standard curriculum for each grade level? Is there a standard curriculum?
No.
That's a recipe for disaster.
Am I allowed to chat? Am I allowed to chat in here, right here? Okay, I'm going to put a link to a really good conversation. Hang on, from Morgan Polikoff, or I'll just chat it, so it's too long to look for it. Where'd it go? So Tom Love. So it's basically, the host is Nat Malkus, and it's called The Report Card at AEI. Okay, and he has a talk with Tom Lovelace. This is recent, like 2 or 3, within the last 2 or 3 podcasts, and Morgan Polikoff. And they go through a lot of these very questions, and Tom Lovelace he's very good at explaining to someone like you, which is an average outsider, believe it or not, like your shock is often shared by people in America. And he does a good job of explaining why, even though it seems crazy, there are some good reasons for it. And this is a podcast. As I said, it's a podcast. So I don't know if you're interested, but you can put the link in, or ask me later and I'll send you the link, because this is a very common question. And one of the things that people who are trying to change American education have not really understood until recently, how much control teachers have, and how setting standards or tests And again, principals, remember, teachers aren't doing this without the principal's permission, because if the principals don't like what the teachers are doing, the principal, even if they can't always fire teachers easily, they can give the teacher different classes and do things to make sure that only the teachers that are doing what the principal wants teach it. So, this is something that's not just, oh, teachers go in and do whatever they want. The variability is something that is kind of baked into the system. And yes, people do find it shocking. I'm not excusing it. I understand you find it shocking, but this is what it is.
So could you give me some of the reasons why you think that this approach is good? What are some good things about this approach in terms of teaching?
Okay, from my perspective as a teacher, because I think you're approaching it as policy. From a policy perspective, this is not what I would recommend. Okay, so I'm saying, given the world that I am handed, I am not, because when I teach high school and I'm teaching high school math, students have no choice. They have to take high school math. Once they pass one class, they have to take the next. Once they do that, they have to take the next. And they need a certain amount of credits to graduate. Okay, so my question is, how can I teach something that is, within the bounds of the course description, while helping kids learn more math and feel useful and feel productive, um, uh, so that they don't just quit and give up and fail, or you know what I mean, and either drop out or go to alternative high school. The more that you can keep a student in school working and feeling productive and like they are moving forward, and that even if it's like, okay, I'm kind of jumping through hoops, but I feel that this is like, I'm getting this. The more I can do that, the more that helps the kid. Okay, now if
How
you
how is
view it as, I'm sorry.
how is that helping a kid if they're just stringing along, if they're just patching them up to keep them in the system and not, the goal should be an education, at least for me, at least in my country. Each grade level, there's a minimum requirement, also there's a minimum set of standards that, okay, that this child has to have understood these things at this particular level before they go to the next level. So when you get people like that moving on to the next level, it's easier because they are almost all at the same level of competency, just within some little variability. But with this kind of discretion, with this wide margin in terms of what the teachers teach the kids and what they allow to pass, how they allow the kids to pass to the next grade level, it's, I don't know, it seems, to me, I think I'm beginning to understand why these gaps exist, because the standards are not objective to force people to. If I know I have to go to the next level and these are the minimum grades I need to get go to the next level, then I have to put in the work. Or you have to get out of the system. You get, but what the sense I'm getting is that the ultimate goal is keeping the kids in the school system. Is that the ultimate goal, or giving them an education that really matters? Which
Okay,
of
so
these two will
first,
you go for?
yeah, I mean, these are all the questions that people argue about. So let me start with this. So first, you said, I see why the standards get wide. I would push at it from the other way. Look, teachers don't just decide to teach less. Okay, so in other words, if you, for example, test scores generally, and I haven't looked at them recently, but generally speaking, low income whites do as well or slightly better, if you take all their test scores, as middle income African Americans, right? This is kind of very consistent in the literature. Again, it might have changed recently, but let's say it's still like that. In that case, and this is true, like if you're talking kids who go to an integrated school, a diverse school, so the teachers aren't saying, oh, we're holding the African American kids to a different standard, or we're not holding the Asians to a tougher standard, or anything like that. They're not, let's say they're not doing that, because they're not. By and large, teachers aren't doing that. So the issue is, you say, well, if the kids are going to an all African American school and the standards are lower, you're saying, how can they get educated? That, I understand that question, but what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that if you work, if you when you're a teacher, when you're a teacher, policy isn't your problem. Okay. When you're a teacher, what's your problem is what's in front of you. Second, there's plenty of evidence. Well, first off, a couple things. First, schools are penalized for dropouts. They are not penalized. And here's an incentive system. Schools are penalized for dropouts. They are not penalized, and they are penalized for failing kids.
That's that's incredible. That's okay. To me, that's the wrong approach anyway.
No,
Why should they be
but
penalized for
again, let
dropouts?
me I totally understand that you find it shocking, but what I'm saying is take a look at it the other way, okay? Because um, suppose, for example, you start in kindergarten and you're teaching I'm giving this as an example, not that it would always happen. Do you understand? Suppose you start at the kindergarten level and you're teaching in African Americans, and it turns out that whatever standard you set, let's say 60% of the African Americans as kindergartners fail it. You say, okay, you have to take it again. And the next time through these kids, now another 30% of them pass, but you still got 30% of them down. So in other words, if you do that, you're going to have a group of kids who might not ever hit the standard. And this is the thing I always kind of tell you. If a student is never going to hit the standard, I would argue that the standard's wrong. Okay. I mean, if you've got a situation where 40 or 50% of your kids are not hitting the standard, and it's in, first grade or second grade, you can either say, and this is what people do, they say, well, the teachers aren't teaching. By and large, they are. Especially what if you have it's a mixed group in the same teacher and you've got white kids who are hitting the standard and African Americans who aren't, or Asians who are and African Americans aren't. Or within one group of kids, some African Americans who are and some African Americans who aren't, some whites who are, some whites who aren't, and so on. What do? If you have a huge amount of people not meeting the standard, I would argue the standard's wrong. And again, if you look at
So
American
you mean,
education, hello?
hello, Michelle. Okay. So you mean to say that if most kids in a class cannot do 5 plus 5, then you should drop the standards to then being able to do math at a level of 2 plus 1. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that if you set a standard so that 40% of the kids don't meet it, then and the kids are learning and they're working and they don't meet it, then there's something off with the standard. And by the way, this is a challenge I don't have an answer
Well,
for
from
because,
what you
yep,
told me, it seems like there's an incentive.
it seems like it's an
There's an
incentive.
incentive for people to, as in there's no incentive for people to want to meet up to. Yes, it seems like it's an incentive for people not to meet up with the standards, because if a school is going to be penalized for students dropping out, then the school is going to go through every means to make sure that people don't drop out and that they pass even when they've not met the
That
required
is that
standards
is
that are even
and we
set
do
by
that.
the teachers. And
And we do
I
that.
don't know, I still find that.
I don't know what to tell you about that because um, there are many people, uh, particularly, by the way, if you look at, I'll give you some other names, Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter. Um, there are Coleman Hughes. These are all people who are African American, and they say that they think that African Americans aren't being held to a given standard, and if they were held to a standard, they would do better. All I can tell you is that I don't think teachers deliberately say, oh, the poor dears, I'm not going to try to teach them. I'm going to let them slip by. In other words, that's what fundamentally you're talking about. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first? The fact that the students are struggling with the material, or the fact that the teacher doesn't hold high standards? Which happens first? In my experience, most teachers being who they are, they don't want to like keep kids bored. They're dealing with kids who struggle with the material. And the idea that, well, they're just not working hard enough, then you get into something that teachers and everybody argues about, which is that um, as long as we have an education system in which the students are given no choice about what to take, then that to me, by the way, is where it should go. To me, I would like, you asked if I think this is great and I'm sticking up for it or something. I would like to see there be tiers, like 4 tiers of high school achievement, right? And so then, so like based on where you are, it's like you're testing in this tier. Well, then let's give you appropriate material so that you can improve. And then when you come out at the other end, the high school diploma will have meaning. It'll be, hey, this person is, 8th grade level. This person, no, this person's, there's 8th, 10th, college ready and elite or something like that. And I would like to see something like that so that we could focus on helping kids achieve for themselves, so that somebody who's like could set a realistic goal and say, hey, I kind of goofed around or just was having trouble learning, but now I kind of get it and I want to get up to the 10th grade level or something like that by high school. But you're right, as it is, if you are a student who has checked out, you won't try to learn, and there will still be significant effort given to help you do enough to pass. However, one last thing. Teachers can also get students to try. And if you want to think about students, and this is depending on your point of view, but if you want to get a student who hasn't tried and is checked out, and you get that student to try, and you're holding standards out that'll show that student how he personally will improve, that to me is worth it. Again, I'm looking at education from I'm looking at education with the hand I've been dealt, which is this is what I have to teach, and then the individual students and what is best for them to get them keeping moving, given that them dropping out is bad, given that just saying, oh, you poor dear, and giving you a passing grade without doing anything or flunking you without doing anything, both of those are bad. These are choices. And not all teachers make the same choice. And there are other teachers who hold very high standards. That's part of the problem, is that there's different standards.
Okay, now I think any teacher will be doing a disservice to any child, um, letting them pass when they have not mastered the skills, the requisite skills for a particular level that they're currently in. Because, take for example, if you're going to go to maybe a university later on in life, or maybe you're going to go to the elite schools, and you get 5 people coming from 5 different backgrounds, and each of these people came from different standards. Let's say standard 1, 2, 3 to 5. 5 is the highest level of standards, and 1 is the lowest level of standards. And now they have to come and compete in an environment that has a sort of a very high standard. You understand? Now, because the students from level 1 to like 3, the standards were so low for them, and they just let them pass. They're not going to do very well in the elite schools. They're not going to. So I don't. It all makes sense to me now why that disparity is there. It does make sense to me now why those disparities are there, because
two things. There's 2 things I would push back on. One, once again, unless you are, I am not saying, this is very important, I am not saying the teachers just say, oh, I'm going to hold Black students to a different standard. Therefore, when you're saying it explains the disparity, no, but what I'm saying is, so when you say explains the disparity, it only explains this disparity if the Black students are struggling to achieve more than the other students. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't really explain the disparity. What it does is say that we're not flunking kids with this disparity.
Okay, let me explain what I mean by explains the disparity. Now, you have taught in a predominantly white and Asian school, right? So most of the kids there have not finished. You have taught in a predominantly Asian and white school, right?
No, Asian and Hispanic.
Okay, Asian and Hispanic, and you have your own set of standards. Let's say your standards are 10. Now, there's another school that has predominantly Black people. Let's say 70% of those people, of the students in that school, they are Black people, and their standards is 2. How do you think those kids, even though there are going to be some white kids in that class, how do you think those kids are going to fare compared to yours, where your standards is 10, and you've taught predominantly Asian people?
Yeah, I understand that. So let me just say, Why is the standard 10 and 2? Again, unless you're arguing that the teachers are lowering the standard simply because the students are African American, which is not my experience, why is the standard 2 in one school and 10 in the other? And by the way, our school is not a super high achieving school. And so that's what I'm saying about
No,
explaining the disparity.
but you just said that there were no standards in the first place. So it is very possible that the kids, the teachers in the black school are not, is really not by design. Probably the quality of teachers that you have in the black, predominantly black schools are such that their standards are naturally suboptimal compared to the teachers that Asians would get, the teachers that the white kids would get. So that's where I'm reasoning at it from. What do you say about that?
No, well, first off, once again, it's important to realize my school's only 19% white. Okay, and so just to be clear, this is not a quote white school. In fact, there's very few majority white high schools in the entire Bay Area. Most of our schools, majority is either Asian or Hispanic. Okay, and there's maybe, I'm going to say, and I'm talking at the high school level,
Yeah,
maybe 5. Okay, so
I get,
again, I just
I
come
get that.
back to this.
I get that.
I just come back to this point, which is if you are saying, here's what I interpret you to be saying. You are saying that, oh, it seems to me that given that teachers can hold any standard, and given that black students are scoring lower, that means that the teachers in those schools must be holding lower standards. And what I would say is the single best predictor of what the standards are for a given school are what the incoming student's ability level is. Okay, so if the incoming student's ability level is on average low, then the teacher will probably, and not always, again, I want to be clear, but I'm telling you what, if you work at if you're a teacher and you flunk most of your students, you will not be teaching that class or those students at some point. That's just how it works, because the principal doesn't want a teacher failing most of the kids. And that's going to be a problem. But what I'm saying is, and then the other thing to remember is that within a school, African Americans still score lower, even go into the same classes. So you have the same teachers holding the same standards. And in those cases, the African Americans might, and again, not all, I want to be clear, the range of every race has a range from really smart to struggling. Okay, so it's not like all Asians, all whites, all, you know what I mean? Within each demographic, you have, I have taught blazingly intelligent kids of all races. I've taught struggling kids, really, really struggling low ability in all races. So I just want to be clear that though, if you look at the on average performance, even in a school with higher standards, the African American kids will have there will be a disparity. That's very consistent. So it's, the idea that, oh, if you hold high standards, that will solve it. It doesn't explain the fact that in diverse schools, African Americans still have a disparity. Now, one of the things that everybody will mention at this point is that if you compare African Americans in integrated schools with a diverse population, and therefore probably, as you said, high standards, as opposed to African Americans in a predominantly black school, the black students in the integrated high school tend to do better, but they only tend to do better compared to the ones in the all what we call majority minority high school. But there's still a gap between blacks, whites, Asians, and Hispanics in that integrated school. So what I'm saying is that while I would, as somebody who works with students like this, as somebody who is considered to have pretty good results getting kids who've never tried to try and learn more than they ever expected. That's kind of my specialty. I would push back and say, generally speaking, teachers set standards based on the incoming ability level of their students. And they do that because, first off, especially at the high school level, if you have a student who tries and flunks, really tries and flunks, so you're all holding the standard up here. Look, you don't graduate from high school. First off, you're costing The student, an F, there's no way right now to give a student credit for working the class, but not credit for not mastering the class. So if supposedly you take Algebra 1, you're like, okay, we're going to give you credit. You're going to get high school credit so that you will move towards graduation, even though you need to take Algebra 1 again. There's no such thing. If they flunk it because they didn't master, then they don't get the credit. And let me tell you something, when you have a kid who's working hard, when you have 30 kids who are working hard and they're not at this standard, and you're going to make every single one of them, and then say they do it in math, English, and science, they will work a whole year and get 0 credits. Now, first off, that's unworkable. That is literally unworkable from the standpoint of it costs money to have kids repeat scores, and it discourages kids. Kids are more likely to fail. So what do? We come up with a standard. But you're saying the disparity is explained by the low standards, and I would argue it's the other way around. The disparity is what causes standards to be different. That would be my argument. And this is, by the way,
So
this is not, you were I just want to say one thing, Charles. You are totally taking the part. There's a millions of people in America who agree with you down the line. This is not, I'm not speaking for most Americans. I'm kind of giving you one viewpoint on it that's mine. I agree, and I want to be clear. There's certain things that this is something. There's a lot of people that disagree on this, but teachers, as a rule, don't. I see a note. Well, if they, okay.
Now, two things. One, from what I gathered from you, it's about the money. It's about
no, it's not only about money. It's partly about money.
Well, you did bring that up, so I think that it's significantly money is a significant part of why it is run that way, and I think.
Well, hang on, just to be clear. Let me clarify that before we go on. It is not the case in individual kids. It does become the case. It does become the case when you have a whole school full of students who are struggling to achieve in any subject. Then absolutely money plays a part. But it also, as I said, remember, schools are, if you know, like, for example, newspapers will say 80% of the kids in this school got an F the whole year, and they'll blame the school. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, look, the school has to hold high standards. If the school's going to be held responsible, you have to decide where to put the responsibility. And there you go. In America, we put the responsibility on the school. We say we put it on the kids and the parents, but we put it on the school.
Okay, now let me get this. You said something about the standards are set by the incoming ability of the students. I still find that problematic in the sense that now you've pushed the responsibility for setting standards from the teacher down to the students themselves. The students, the teacher is supposed to impart knowledge on the students, and you're putting that responsibility on them. Take, for example, in my country, you start at kindergarten level, and then you progress upwards. For every kid that has to leave the kindergarten 1, the kid has to have mastered the things, most of the things within that grade, within that level. So it's easier for them to come with the same set of skills with others that are coming into kindergarten 2.
Right.
But if there are really no standards per se for kindergarten 1, what you get is that some of the students will be coming with with very, very, very low ability, and that is going to determine the standards that the teacher is going to set for that level, which is,
yeah, there you go. That's ding, 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 ding. That's their lives. Yes, yes, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. Let me push back on. That's how. Yeah, but I will say this again, and this is particularly true at the high school level. There is this, but again, I teach in a school. Like, if you look at my standards compared to like an elite school, my standards are going to be lower, but it's not going to be like this. It's going to be more like that. You know what I'm saying? But are there cases like this? Let me give you an example. There are many schools that are majority minority, very low achieving, and they teach what we in America call advanced placement. And if you teach an advanced placement class, you get a higher GPA. Like, instead of a 4-point A, you get a 5-point A. So it weights your grade, right? And then you're supposed to take the test that goes with it. Well, in many, many, many schools, nobody in the class who is getting the additional weight, they take the test and nobody passes it. They all get ones, the lowest score. Okay, so that clearly they have very low standards in that class, and yet they're still given the weight and said, look, you got, we're going to give you the 5-point A. Meanwhile, in another school, and this is, by the way, I think this is highly inequitable, I am not excusing it, but another school, you've got kids whose skills are far, far, far ahead of the kids I just described, and they're getting B's and C's in normal classes. They're not even allowed to take the AP classes because there's too many top kids in their school and they don't have enough, room in the classes. And this is a constant inequity, and I do not like this. But here's one other thing I wanted to ask you. Remember when you said, I'm not being fair to those kids when they go to college? Here's a question for you. Why are colleges accepting kids with low abilities? And in America,
They shouldn't be.
thank you. Thank you. There we can agree. If you want to see how to drive the problem, the way to drive it is not to demand that schools change. High schools in particular, it's not fair. There's kids who don't want to go to college. There's kids who don't want to even be in school. And we know that data shows that even if they don't want to be in school, getting them to kind of play the game is better for them in the long run, if only they learn how to play the game. But why are colleges accepting them? To me, the way to start is to demand that colleges start saying there is a particular standard that you have to meet. Now, colleges aren't going to do that. I believe the government, probably the federal government could. The federal government could say something like, you know what? We're not going to give you funding if you accept anybody. But right now they don't, and there's good reason. In fact, they've just done away with the SAT. I don't know if you've heard it, but many colleges are no longer going to require it. Where I teach in our elite university system, the University of California, they are no longer accepting the SAT, at least for now. So the real issue is that this goes all the way up, and I find this very concerning. And the thing that used to keep all this straight was the test. You know what I mean? So if you were a kid who went to a low standard school and you had a 4.0 GPA, but you took, which means a straight A average, but you took the SAT and you got 400, and the people looking at okay, your skills are low. Now, you can say, and I do, that we are lying to that student because he says 4.0. I don't disagree with anything you say about that. I want to be clear. I agree. My pushback is not that we should be allowing to set standards. My pushback is, given that we have such a wide range of ability kids, we should have a wider range of classes for them to choose from so that they can move ahead and accurately reflect their ability in the correct classes. But we're not allowed to do that. And
Okay.
somebody said there was a
No,
I'm sorry.
this is what I also take. Okay. This is something else that's been going through my mind as we're having this conversation. It's like the school system is a feel-good system for the students. I mean, since basically the standards is going to still be set by them. But that aside, when you look at the fact that I think there's some correlation between socioeconomic status of the kids and their grade scores or their performance in school. Am I correct in saying that? Am I correct in saying that?
Well, there is, with the understanding that, as I first off, poor Asians often score very high, but poor whites often do well. And as I said before, within so if you take on average socioeconomic, the lower it goes from low to high. But if you then take it within race, it goes from low to high. However, the high in one race might be below the low in another race, and that's where things get problematic. So the most common one, as I said, is that poor whites tend to do better than non-poor blacks. And take an average test scores. Like if you look at the NAEP, which is our standardized test for the whole country, it's not everybody tests, but it's tried to be a representative sample. Unless this has changed recently, and again, I haven't looked at it in about 4 years, but generally speaking, low-income whites outscore non-high-income blacks. This is also true on the SAT. In fact, it was so embarrassing on the SAT, they stopped reporting it because poor whites did better than you know, rich blacks. Now, so how do you explain that? And this, by the way, this is where people start to get nervous, which I understand that you asked before, what is the cause of it? I can't give you the cause of it. And I don't know. I'm not being shy. I don't know. What I do know is that by and large, certain things are true. One, the idea that teachers, like you said, American school is a feel-good system. No, it's really not. We're talking about the kid who we get and convince to work. It will be work for him, or her. So it's not a feel-good system. We spend a lot of time not giving kids what we feel they need. So it's not a feel-good system. And the other thing I can say is that teachers, I find a lot of people believe that teachers are like, oh, I'm not going to bother to work and I'll just teach them easy stuff. No, that's. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any teachers like that in the world, but that's not it. Behavior is a real issue. Behavior, if you, and this is again something teachers would say, is that in classes that have a lot of low skill kids, and I talked about this, there's a podcast I did out there with Glenn Lowry where I talk about this, is that if you have a class with a lot of low skilled kids, and then you also have kids who don't want to be there and are disruptive, schools are not given a good incentive to remove the problem kids from the classroom. They are also penalized for doing so. And so that also, so suppose you have a group of kids who really would like to learn and work hard and do as best they can, but you've got 5 kids in the class who are goofing around and throwing things and talking and not trying and screaming and everything else. And this happens. I've taught classes like that. It's very difficult to do. And so there's behavior constraints, and the more kids you have who misbehave, the more problematic it is for the school to say, let's penalize the kids. If you have one kid who misbehaves, it's pretty easy. If you've got 20 in a class, or even 5 in a class, and then you have 5 in every class, that starts to be a problem. So these are all kind of mixed incentives. All of that said, I really don't think that America will ever be the kind of place where, like, we're going to set this standard right here and everybody's going to work hard and achieve it. No, if we set this standard right here, we're going to flunk a lot of kids. And
Okay,
that
so
is fundamentally the problem.
has it always been like this? I mean, has the
Yeah.
educational system always
Oh,
set up this way since
no.
America?
First off, could you say the whole thing again? I apologize. I started speaking before you were done. So you said, has it always been like this? And then go from there. I apologize for speaking over you.
Okay, so I said, has it always been like this since America was founded, or did it progressively change along the line? And at what specific points in the history of America did these changes begin to come into the educational system?
Okay. So America's investment in public school has always been, throughout history, been higher and more accessible than pretty much any other country in the world. And starting in the 1910s and 1920s, we started sending most kids through high school. At the time, however, you took different course loads depending on your interest level. And at the time, if you decided to drop out, it was okay. And it didn't mean the end of your, you could get a perfectly good job as a high school dropout, right? For much of American history in the 20th century until that. So we have always had a very accessible education system. We've always said funded kids to go. We've always, at the same time, there were kids who didn't want to do it and dropped out, and you could take different courses depending on your interest level. The general point at which things started to change, and this is again where it gets very problematic, is in the 1960s when we came up with the elementary ESEA, I forget what it stands for. But basically, when the federal government started funding education, and they said, well, wait a minute, we want poor kids to do as well as rich kids. We want, and we're going to hold schools responsible. We're going to look at outcomes and say, are they even? Are they even? And if they're not even, America went through, first we're going to blame the kids, then we're going to blame the parents, and ultimately started blaming the teachers and the schools, which is where we've been for about 30 years now. Before that, it was parents and kids. But I would say, generally speaking, and in saying this, uh, it's important to realize that that before this act, we didn't fund African American kids. You know what I mean? We didn't care about them. We didn't treat them with equal rights. We didn't do a bunch of things. So it's important to realize that that was bad too. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it was before this time when we talked about everybody getting access to school. African Americans did have access to school, but in many, many places, it was not equal access. That was Brown versus the Board of Education. And even where it was, and in many cases it was, I mean, there were many African Americans of high achievement because America did fund school, but there were many cases where it wasn't equal. So what happened in 1960, I think it's 65, maybe 64, that was when they started saying, hey, we're going to give you money, but you need to make sure that you're treating everybody equally and giving them equal access. Everybody thought that when we did that, that everybody would achieve the same. When they didn't achieve the same, and this is where cause comes in, and there's many people who think, well, the cause is, as you say, bad standards. There's other people who think the cause is bad teachers. There's other people that there's a million explanations, but the point is, it's now close to 60 years on, and we don't have the equal results that we kind of assumed would happen when we started saying treat everybody equally, and that's caused problems. And so generally speaking, that is the point at which we started to have, how do we deal with this? We've been working with it ever since. And I'm not, again, I don't want to say, well, it's that fault, because again, what happened before was not good. There are way more achievements. And by the way, in the 70s, 60s and 70s, Black and white achievement gap did reduce, and then it stalled. And so we are continually wanting to improve it. So there you go. So in other words, what caused it before that, it was very common to say you can go to school as long as you're good, and then you're going to drop out, and or you can take these lower classes. And unfortunately, there were many schools where the Black kids were shunted into the lower ability classes without regard for their actual intelligence or ability. And so we changed that. But when we changed it, we expected the problem to go away, and it didn't. And when it didn't, we end up in this continual tension that we have, and still do. And I don't know what the answer is. What I am telling you as a teacher, when you are working with students, you look at that student and you teach that student or that group of students, and you try to help all of them learn and achieve more. Some teachers do it by saying, I'm going to set one standard equally. Other teachers do it by saying, I'm gonna expand the difference between an A and an F, like stretch it. You know what I mean? So I still give A, B, C, Z, and F. But whereas this teacher I have here, the bottom 30% would get F. I'm like, no, that's a C, and then some D's and F's at the bottom. And this is what we do. And it comes from the fact that one of the many ways in which we've tried to address this problem is by taking away choice from students. They don't get to choose what classes they take. They have to take all equally difficult classes. And and by the way, we will fail some of these kids. Believe me, a lot of kids fail. A lot of kids fail their classes. This is why when you say it's a feel-good place, no, we're failing a lot of kids. Okay? And so who do you blame for that? You are clearly like, well, the kid will take it again. The kid takes it again and still doesn't learn. How many times does the kid take the class and not learn? Right? And when you realize that not giving that kid a high school diploma is, first off, going to get the school held responsible if they didn't give it to them through failing. Second off, going to really come down hard on the school if the race gap between the kids who are getting out and the kids who aren't is bad. When you take all those incentives on the school, right, and well as the fact that we're talking about kids who don't get a choice about what they're going to take. So
see, it will make a lot of sense to punish the schools for students failing if there was an objective standard. It means that the teachers or the school administration is not capable, or they're not doing their jobs to make the student meet those particular standards. But when the standards are so variable, then it doesn't make any sense to hold the school responsible for why the students will fail, because that's an easy way out for the school. They'll just pass everybody. But if there
And which is
is a
what, which is,
standard, the
well, the
minimum,
first off, they don't just pass everybody, because remember,
I know,
teachers,
I know, I know, I know. They just,
yeah,
I just see that, in the
no, I
sense
mean,
of
I'm just
okay,
saying they don't pass. I think your logic is correct on that. But here's the other thing to remember. What if you get a bunch of kids with very low ability levels? Are you going to penalize the school? If I'm an algebra
what
2
what
teacher.
what do you mean by low ability? The students are supposed to come to the school to improve their ability. Most of the time they come, they don't know anything. It is the function and the job of the teachers and the school to make sure they impart knowledge on them. So your leaving the school should not be dependent on how you came in. There should be a difference. Coming into the school, you're supposed to really not know so much for that level. When you're leaving that level, then you're supposed to have matched up to the ability of that level. So is the
Sure,
ability of these
but you're
kids, is
assuming
it
that every student
don't
you're assuming that every student doesn't know the same amount of information. Okay, so suppose in America, high school starts in ninth grade. So when we have a bunch of kids come to ninth grade, some of those kids are reading at ninth grade level. Some of those kids are reading at 11th grade level. Some of those kids are reading in fifth grade level. Oh, and by the way, some of those kids just got here into America and they're being judged and in the same school. We have to teach kids who don't speak any English at all in the same school.
why should
Okay,
why should a kid reading at fifth grade level be in a ninth grade class?
say
Why?
again. Why what? I didn't
Why
hear.
should a kid why should a kid who is reading at fifth grade level be in a ninth grade class?
What were you
Why?
going to do with him when he's in fifth
You
grade?
take
And in fifth grade, he's reading at the third grade level. And so you teach him, and by the time he gets to eighth grade, he's reading in the fifth grade level. What are you going to do?
you take him to the fifth grade level, take him to the level where he's currently at. That's that's to me, that's the right thing to do.
Well, okay,
Take him to
now
the
I
level
absolutely
where
agree, but you're not. So first off, understand you're not going to have the kid repeat fifth grade endlessly, right? You're not, because that's going to cause problems. This is the problem. Everybody says
now,
repeat a grade.
if the kids are repeating that grade level, uh, and if the amount of kids that are repeating that level, they're getting much, then there's a problem with the school system. Then there's a problem with the teachers. Then there's a problem with teaching techniques,
No, no,
because
no, no, no.
if the
Hang
teachers
on.
are,
We've got 35 kids in a classroom. 35 kids in a classroom, and the kids come in. So let's say it's a fifth grade classroom, and the kids come in, and 4 of those kids are reading at the seventh grade level, and 20 of those kids are reading at the fourth grade level, where they should be, right, as they're coming in the fifth grade. And 3 of those kids are reading at the third grade level. Okay, so they're reading at the third grade level, and then a bunch of the kids are reading at the fifth grade level, and then some of them are reading above. So now um, the teacher has to deal with all those abilities. Okay, so when they come out, the kid who's in third grade level is now reading. 2 of them are reading at the fourth grade level, and one of them's reading at the third grade level still. Okay, and then the kids who are reading at the seventh grade level are now reading at the eighth grade level, and then you have all the kids who are at grade level, and some of them are ahead of it, some of them are now behind. You can't say it's all the teacher's fault. You're
okay,
trying to
now
say that there's
I'm not saying it's the teacher's fault. I'm saying that you said you can't keep repeating, they can't keep repeating a class forever. I am saying that if a child repeats a class, or if majority of the students are repeating that same class because they're not passing the basic requirements for that level, there's something wrong in either the teaching technique or the administration, not just with the students, but something from the teacher angle. I'm not pushing it to the teachers that that's their problem, but I'm
no.
saying
I'm
if
not
that
being defensive, but I'm also saying
if
that the fact is that first off, do you
and
believe? Let me ask you a question: Is nobody below average? Is nobody below average?
a lot of people are below average. A lot of
Say
people are
again.
below average. I say a lot of people are below average.
Okay, so what happens to below average people? So you're in a class and you're in kindergarten, and in kindergarten you have above average, average, and below average. You're going to move in the first grade. Now, you're either going to make so let's say you keep the kindergarten to below average behind, and they go through it again, and let's say some of them are now average, but a lot of them are still below average. At some point, you're going to move them on to first grade, and they're going to get moved on to first grade below average because not everybody gets to average.
Okay,
Not
now
everybody gets to average.
we're not talking about averages in the sense of averages in the absolute. But to me, there should be a minimum standard. I mean,
And what I'm
minimum.
saying is, yes. And what I'm saying is that
From that
our minimum
minimum,
standard,
be there can be as many high achieving levels, but that minimum is the basic requirements you need to be at that level. For example,
yes,
if with one you have to be able to do 1 plus 1 is 2, that's the minimum level. But someone at that grade can be able to do 144 times 30 and get it off the bat, you understand? But at that
okay,
grade
great,
level, the minimum should be okay, 1 plus 1 is 2, and everybody that's coming to this level should be able to do that at least.
great. Hold that thought. Okay, so let's say I take in a bunch of kids at kindergarten, and they have a wide range of ability at kindergarten, but at the end of the day, all of my 25 kids in kindergarten meet the minimum standard of 1 plus 1 equals 2. But some of them do 144 times 32. But all of them do 1 plus 1 equals 2. When you put them into first grade, are you saying that you're going to be able to teach them all at the same level? You've got to teach a whole group of kids who only know 1 plus 1 equals 2. You got to teach them something else. Meanwhile, your top kids are ready to learn something else. You either have to make them learn all this again, or you group them, and in America, grouping's not good. Or you end up saying, I've got to teach different standards. One of the three. You can't, if you have a minimum standard, if the gap between your minimum and your maximum ability is huge, you're going to have this problem, because no matter what your minimum standard is, those kids are going to be behind the advanced kids as they move forward. And we
Okay,
can't in America say, say again.
This is what happens in my country. If we find a kid that's performing above the level of the particular grade that is in, we move the kid up to a higher level. We call it double promotion in my country. We move you up to the next level. So that you don't get stuck in that level with kids who are not up to your ability at that point. You understand? And those that are not meeting up, those that are not meeting up, you keep them at that level till they're able to meet up, or they have somehow they withdraw, they do other things.
Okay.
It's not a must.
So in America, those things are called acceleration and retention. Generally speaking, acceleration, a lot of students want acceleration. There's a lot of adults who think, oh, we should move kids ahead. But the fact is that there's some kids who learn the basics very quickly, and then they run into walls. Second off, we have the age problem. But let's say but what you're saying is you give them additional challenge. Well, another way to give them additional challenge is to say, okay, we've got our incoming first graders, and this group is already doing really well. So let's put them here and let's make sure that they're learning. And this group's like right at ability level. Let's put them in a separate class. And then this group needs additional help. So let's put them in the third class. We can't do that in America. Okay, and it's highly controversial. That's called tracking or ability grouping, and it's highly controversial. Now, and so, and what I'm saying is acceleration. You wouldn't accelerate if you had, again, if you have a huge amount of kids. Suppose you have 80 kids, okay, and suppose your standard is 1 plus 1 equals 2. But suppose 50 of your kids are at 15 times 15 equals 225. Well, then your standard's too low. Except you've still got these kids who are down there. And that's the problem, is, again, what we're basically talking about is when the ability range gets too huge, okay, and you have too many kids, that you run into this problem. And that's what I'm trying to say. It is common for me to have a range of 3 to 4, quote, grade level, 3 to 4 years of achievement in one class. It's very common. And that's actually harder to teach than if you've got everybody in your class below level. You know, if you've got everybody in your class below level and 1 and 2 kids that are at grade level, you're like, great, you two here, I'll come teach you over here in the corner. And then everybody else, you'll go more slowly. It's much harder when you have like 5 kids who are ready for your class, another 15 kids who are mostly ready and they need to be motivated, but you'll be able to get it. And then 5 kids that are counting on their fingers. Okay. And this is very common.
Isn't it problematic for teachers having to teach people with different ability in the same class?
Isn't
it strenuous?
Yes. It is extremely difficult. And I speak as somebody who's pretty good at it. It's extremely difficult. And in America, one of the things that progressive educators talk about is this term differentiation. And differentiation is a fancy way of saying, hey, it's super easy. You just have to create different lessons for all of your groups, but you don't want to do ability grouping, and you don't want to, maybe what you should do is take a smart kid with a weak kid and put them together. And then, and there's there's a whole education theory around this. Okay. And yeah, it's called, sometimes it's called, hang on, what is the term? Well, there's differentiation, but there's another word. It'll come to me in a minute. Heterogeneous classrooms, meaning you have a wide range of abilities, and here is how you handle it by defining different things as smart. So you say, look, that kid went and drew a nice picture on the board. Look at how great he is. And this kid solved the quadratic formula. Look at how great he is. And you're like, oh, please. It's like, it gets ridiculous. And that's very common in ed schools. And by the way, education schools are where teachers are trained. And a lot of people blame teachers. They say, well, they've been taught badly in ed schools, but most teachers in ed schools are going, yeah, this isn't going to work. And they don't do it on the outside world. So, but yeah, it's very difficult. And again, I speak as somebody who does it fairly well. It's very difficult, and you're always shortchanging somebody. And in fact, you could argue that teachers make the decision who to shortchange. And that's where the standards issues come in. If you've got a teacher's like, I'm going to be high standards up here, they're going to fail 40% of their class. Well, guess what? Principals don't like that teacher quite as much as they like me. Or they might say, let's give that teacher top students, because I don't want half my kids giving up. Because the principal is looking at the outcome of kids. You're looking at we need to educate kids. Principals and teachers are looking at the overall growth of kids. And I don't mean in a squishy way. I mean, we got to give them the skills, not in some objective sense, but the skills to use what's in their ability level, get them motivated to learn how to kind of go out into the world. And by the way, most kids in a heterogeneous ability school, they don't believe that they're geniuses if they're not. You know what I mean? But they still feel like, hey, I don't get math, but I get it better than I used to. And that matters. And that matters. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to go to college, but it does mean that they're going to have the ability to say, hey, my boss gave me something new to do, and I can learn this the same way I learned other stuff. It gives them a sense of achievement. And again, these are the things. I mean, everything you said, you're exactly right. And by the way, I have that problem. People in my type of school, very diverse, that's my difficult problem. If you are working in a school where everybody's low ability, you have a different problem, usually down there. And so there's different problems depending on where you are. And again, if you teach in a really, really school where everybody is at grade level, then you're giving C's to kids who in another school would be geniuses. And that's also unfair. In other words, there's tremendous inequity all throughout. And I don't have any answers. All I'm saying is that what teachers and schools are doing are responding to the conditions and, to a lesser extent, the incentives that are given. Teachers, remember, in America, teachers keep their jobs no matter what. Okay, it's very hard to fire teachers. Not impossible, but hard. And so generally speaking, teachers like kids, and they want to see kids learn. That's why we're teachers, okay? Or they want to help kids, they want to help kids like the subject, or they want to help kids, kind of find agency so that they'll go out and, find their way in the world. Different teachers like different things. But we're not just going, whatever. As a rule, we're not doing that. And we're dealing with difficult circumstances. And I would argue, and many people argue, it's because our policy is not set up to acknowledge reality. When reality says, leave race out of it. Let me just say one last thing and I'll shut up. Leave race out of it. Kids have certain ability levels, and what we want them to do is progress along that ability level. And what would be nice if A, they were allowed to progress, and B, we didn't pretend that a low level of progression and a high level of progression are the same thing. And we are a long way from that. In fact, throughout the past year, when there's been all this, the pandemic has said to things, we're going, I would argue, backwards. We're going to where we're going to remove tests entirely. It's going to be all about grades. And everything I just told you about different teachers setting different standards will have no baseline test score to match it up again. That's a problem. So right now it's getting worse, not better, in my opinion.
Okay. Before I say this, let me just say, uh, what I normally do is after a while, my principal guest, after chatting with my principal guest for a while, I let in some people come in, some of my very
Mhm.
dedicated viewers come in, and they ask questions. Would you like to have like two people come in to
Yeah,
question, to ask
I saw
questions?
there were two comments that came in already. I
Stanley
saw
and
them.
Chloe. Okay, so I would post the link for them to join the chat so that we can have
Okay.
a talk minutes before
Okay.
we end. And I would also want to do another live stream with you. I want to this time I want to talk about the teachers and the standards for the teachers. It was part of my itinerary for today, but time it will take a
And
whole
I've
lot of
totally
time.
blown your mind with the standard thing, so you have to go think about that for a while, right? I
So
have very much I want to say, Charles, you asked great questions. This has been a fascinating conversation. I feel like either one of us is a Martian. I'm not sure which one is the Martian. You know what I mean? But you're like, what? But thank you for bearing with me and asking such great questions. I very much enjoyed it.
thank you for coming on. So I'll let me post the link in the comment section so people can come in. Chloe and Stanley, specifically, I want to hear your voices. So now the link is up there. You can call it. The thing
Oh, I
is,
see them. Yeah.
yeah, the thing is
Okay.
to
Okay.
me. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just can I go through the many that I already see and just kind of answer the ones that are there? I hadn't seen them up to now. Okay. So thank you to Stanley. Um, do what they do in Korea. Every classroom of a given grade teaches almost the exact same thing in that. And by the way, M Love Mode, that's what they also do in France. Again, if you think of it, I mentioned heterogeneous classrooms. I think the thing to remember is that many American schools, and certainly nationally, they're heterogeneous, meaning widely different ranges of ability. In Korea, they are homogenous, and also Koreans spend an enormous amount of time in after-school programs where they oftentimes sleep through school and then work in the after-school programs. And I don't think America would use that kind of control. Um, Hang on. Chloe was saying some things. There are different types of standard by state. I'm just going through. Home environment holds more on the effect of a student, which makes the debate of teacher not teaching well enough difficult to have. Um, well, there's always an issue. Look, every teacher can tell you stories of kids who are in nightmarish home environments who achieve. I can give you personal stories. And then there's always well, if the parents are committed. Look, I know parents who are really committed and they have kids who are just goofing around all the time, no matter what the parent does. So I've never found it as linear than that. And fundamentally, and I want to be clear. I don't know nature versus nurture, but at the end of the day, whatever intelligence you have is an enormous amount of the impact. In other words, and I'm not convinced that it's parents or teaching or anything else. These all matter around the edges. Parents supporting their kids and teachers making sure that kids are engaged and all these all play a part. But at the end of the day, I think your fundamental ability level, and I hate to use the word innate because I'm not a biological expert, and God knows this is an enormous discussion in the States. But um, I do believe that there is below. I don't believe when people say everybody can achieve. I'm like, everybody can improve. That's different from everybody can achieve. And I think those are different things. Now, the difference is that I think improvement is worthwhile. Many people think, no, if they're not going to get to this level, forget it. And that's where we disagree. I want to know how to measure it. But I do believe that that helping kids learn how to sense how they're learning, I think is very important. Okay. Chloe, you're going with the home environment. Yes, I agree with M Love. I don't know M Love Mo. I don't know what your name is, but that's true. Um, they're talking to each other. I'm trying to look for comments. Um, I disagree with Melinda. It's about money. When I was in high school, my math teacher was on the way out to retire, let the whole class know he didn't care if we got it just because he needed it. First off, teachers don't need butts in seats at all. They don't. It's indifferent to them. And I have personally known a lot of teachers on their way out who work hard at it. I'm not saying everybody does, but I don't think that's it. Um, I just think more students could encourage. Melinda makes a very important point at 318, and I will tell what's wrong. I think more teachers should encourage kids to retake classes. You can't retake classes in high school. You can't retake classes in college. It's on your transcript. The transcript is a legal document. The only way you can make a kid retake a class is to fail them. If they fail them, they don't get credit. So I have a lot of kids who and this is again a constant problem. There's a lot of kids who worked hard in algebra 2 and they got a C. It's like, you really, in order to manage trig and pre-calc, you need better than a C, but we can't give it to you. We either have to give you a D, which will trigger the retake, but at least you'll get credit, or we have to move you on. And this is, again, the big problem, because, again, the further up in math, particularly you go, the worse, the larger the gap gets. Why are college accepting rich white kids whose parents donate? Okay, 213 love mine. Okay, first off, I oppose legacy, but trust me when I say the rich white kids whose parents donate, by and large, they are able to do college level work, whether or not they are the particularly best suited person for that school. What's really happening is the number of kids who are being accepted with extremely low abilities. I mean, like, not being able to read at an 8th grade level type of that's happening, particularly in community colleges. The restriction of range, it's not that I don't support. I think there shouldn't be donors accepted, or they should be done in some public way. But when I talk about college lowering standards, I'm talking about just stunningly low standards. The average ability of a college level student has plummeted in the past 30 years in America, and I consider that a real problem. Melinda, what happened? High schools should be held responsible. What happened to ROP? They still exist. The problem is that if there is a disparate impact in the kids that you're recommending for vocational training, that's going to be a problem. Also, and this is very important, vocational training in America is of such high quality that basically, if you're good enough for vocational training, you're good enough to go to college. The real issue is, what do you do with the kids who, it takes them 3 days to pick up a pencil? And don't joke, that's a lot of kids. How do you get those kids, and what are you training those kids on? Is that everything? I think I got everything up to there. Let me go to the recent stuff. Okay, there we go. So if anybody has any other questions, I just kind of wanted to go through the back level because I hadn't seen it.
Okay.
Okay.
So
any other questions?
Yeah. So someone is going to come in right now. I think what I get, I'm always fascinated at how Americans complicate things. I mean, you just take very simple things and you make it very complex and make it very complicated. It's sort of a superpower that America has. With this schooling system, with what you just told me, it's so complex. And I think part of the reason why it's that complex is because they're trying to engineer outcomes. I mean, um, you want every kid, every race to come out, every ethnicity to come out with similar outcomes in terms of their grade scores and all that. And if that doesn't happen, you're going to penalize the school. I mean, that's the wrong approach, but it does seem to me that that's the way it's going. That's why it's so complex. That's why it's getting this, having this whole mess. To me, I think outcomes in terms of harmonizing outcomes should not be a priority. Priority is that, are these kids getting an education? Are they meeting the minimum standards? Are they learning anything at all? Not whether or not the proportion of kids who have this ethnicity are meeting that, the proportion of kids who have another ethnicity are meeting that. That's to me, it doesn't make sense. Anyhow, Chloe, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
no Cam. Yeah, so it's like, I guess I want to get back to like the home environment thing, and I do agree. There are definitely, I think those are the kind of outliers, right? You were talking about, like someone from a hellish environment that actually succeeded. That's my mother, right? She was from a hellish environment, and she ended up going to college on a scholarship, a full ride scholarship. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to go to college and get a 4-year degree. Um, and then And, there are people who are, have all the privileges afforded to them, and they still can't really get through school. Their parents are like struggling. I have a coworker who's that was her son, right? She didn't know what to do with them, really. She was just hoping that he was gonna, get out of high school without going to jail. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but I think in between, like for my parents, they made sure I did my homework. They made sure they knew what my homework was. They made sure of like, are you really having issues with this? They tried to get me supplemental stuff. So like when they thought that my brother was having like reading issues, they, went to Sullivan's. They actively tried to fix the gap at home, as opposed to, well, the teacher needs to do it, right? And so they tried that they complemented the school, like the education. And I think that I think that needs to be a factor of, parents. Like, I do think that parents kind of sometimes need to be more active. They need to know, like, like, oh, are you learning algebra? Are you learning this? But I think then that kind of gets into the deficits, because like, let's say, your dad doesn't know math very, very well, and your daughter comes home with the math questions and the dad can't help, or the mom can't help, and they don't know how to bridge that gap. They can see maybe their kid is struggling a little bit, but they don't even they don't know how to get there. And so I can see deficits happening in that way, because it does factor in what the kids bring to the school environment, and it's not equal.
Okay, so no. So first up, just for neither one of my parents graduated from college. Neither one of them went to college. And I'm a college graduate, and none of my brothers and sisters, well, actually, my littlest sister is, but my other ones that my family of origin are. My son graduated from college. So I came from a working class background, is my point. So this stuff, I know what you mean when you talk about it. But so here's something that when you talk about homework, and I know Charles is going to just have a fit when I say this, but I'm like, why are teachers giving kids stuff to do at home? You know what I'm saying? There's maybe 10% of a school of kids that you could give challenging problems to at home and have them do it. The reason we give kids problems to do, I know Charles is like, what? The reason we give kids problems to do at home is because we want them to learn and master the material on their own time rather than school time, so that they can go to the next thing. And the reason they want that, Charles, is because they want to cover all the standards, right? And so they say, look, I'll teach you this much, you can learn it here. Now go do 20 of these on your own. And of course, a lot of kids can't do them. And I know that homework participation in high school is somewhere around 10 to 20% on average throughout the country. I don't know the exact number, but it's very low. Most kids don't do homework, and there's kids who flunk classes purely because they don't do their homework. In other words, they pass the test but don't get their homework. So homework is an enormous, enormous issue in general. So when you say these things, I agree that's inequity, but to me, the solution is that we should be teaching deeper, less, again, probably grouping more, but also kids, if they can't do it at home, or I would argue you shouldn't ever give students work at home. I mean, I just don't see the point. So again, I speak for maybe 10% of the teachers on the planet, but you see my point. If you rearrange your day that way, which I do, my kids are still testing it roughly the same. In other words, I cover less material, but the kids retain quite a bit of it, particularly like the lower ability kids. And so I don't do homework. And that's one way you can deal with equity. So part of my point is, rather than say, well, the inequity problem is parents aren't doing homework, the inequity should be, why are schools saying you should do work at home? That's our problem. Most kids don't know how to do, there's two ways to do homework. And by the way, this is a common discussion thing in teachers. You could say, okay, when you get home, here's 3 simple problems that we just covered today. Can you do those 3 simple problems? Yes. Great. Now, for some kids, that's ridiculously boring and they know them and there's no point. For other kids, that's exactly what they need to do. For other kids, it's more like, hey, I want you to spend 45 minutes playing with this situation, right? That's your top kids. How do you do both at the same time? Answer, you don't. So I'm just giving you that as an example to show that when you talk about inequity, you could actually talk about restructuring your school day so that doesn't happen. But you would need, again, and this is the big issue, to separate your kids out a little more based on what they need.
Okay.
Let me just comment a bit about this homework issue. You said I was going to. Yeah. Now, you said one of the reasons why teachers give homework is so they can cover more curriculum. But to me, I think it's more a function of giving a kid a challenge, something, the more you do something, the more you repeat an activity, the more it becomes easier for you to do. It becomes easier for you to understand. And I think homework is just part of that challenge. You give this child to go back in your own quiet time. Probably there are other ways that this kid can learn, and they will be able to discover that maybe at home. And probably there's a unique angle that the parents are bringing into it, and they're going to be able to discover that. In my country, homework is a big deal. If you don't do your homework, just know they're in trouble. When you get to school the next day, you're in trouble. And those scores, when they get back home, if the scores are not good, you're going to be in trouble with your parents as well. I used to get a beating every day when I was in primary school, going home from my mom. I was terrible at math. So every time I come home and the scores were terrible, definitely I was going to get a beating from my mom. And then I was able to
We frown
improve
upon that
because
in
of that.
America too, though, just to be clear.
Yeah. I
That was
know. I
also my fear
understand
too.
that. Understand that.
Well, let me say something about. So here's when. So this is a good point. Once again, we talk about ability levels. What you described as homework is appropriate for what I would call, maybe in my particular group of kids, the top 5, 6, 10%. And I'd say, but if you didn't really understood it when it was introduced, and it's like, look, okay, you're now at the point, like, suppose I teach you how to graph a line, right? And you're like, okay, so I just want you to say, y equals mx plus v, which is, the mothership of linear equations, right? So, m is the slope. How do you do the slope? B is the y-intercept, right? Then you've got this group of kids that they get it already. And you're like, okay, now here's a word problem. Turn this word problem into a line, or here's an unusual shape, usual equation. Solve it for y and see what you get, and stuff like that. But the kids who are barely like, look, I'm still going up instead of down, or down instead of up, and I'm still getting my x and y intercept confused, that's not going to do for them. Once again, it goes to the range of ability in your class. So I would actually enjoy, I don't know if I'd ever give homework. I didn't like homework when I was in school, but that's a personal thing. I don't have an equity issue with it. But you'd have to have kids at the same ability level, that when you introduce a topic, that everybody gets a topic at roughly the same thing. Now, some people said, well, what about after school tutoring? So here's the thing. First off, you're talking about kids who hate school and saying, not a problem, just do 2 more hours of it every freaking day. Oh, yeah, that's going to work. It's not. It's not going to work. Okay. The kids that go to after school tutoring are the kids who want an A. Okay. That's who they are. And they know that a lot of teachers will not give you an A if you don't do homework. So they go to after school homework they go to after school tutoring so they can get their homework done and know that it's done so they can get an A. But the point of homework should be the understanding of the math, not the doing of the homework. And so what is it you want kids to do with homework? So again, I go back to, this is my particular problem at a school like mine, which has a diverse ability set. Other schools don't have this problem. There's a school in my district called Mission San Jose. Well, in that school, if you enter algebra in 9th grade, you're kind of a little bit like most kids enter 9th grade at the algebra 2 or geometry level. And there the kids go home every night and they do 3 hours of homework, and that's what they do. And everybody in the school does the same thing. Fine. But if you have kids who aren't doing homework, you're not going to fail them, and you're going to accept the fact that it's kind of unfair if kids don't feel that their work is getting them anywhere. because they didn't really get it to the same level that other kids did. Then the answer is to help the kids get it better. Maybe not ever as well as other kids do, but at least better.
So how do you help the kids get it better without compromising their learning, their improving, without compromising the standards? How do you get them to improve?
Not only that, not just without compromising the standards, but without boring the kids who do get it the first time. And the answer is, I go back to the problem that there you have. And again, not all American classrooms have this issue. This is, I just want to be clear. This goes back to homogeneous versus heterogeneous. My experience as my 12 years of teaching is heterogeneous. In other words, I have that wide ability range. There's other teachers, there's many, and this is the other thing to remember, is that there's many schools throughout America that don't have this problem, that they all do standards. It might be because they're all low ability or because they're all at the ability the teachers want. But they have different issues. The teachers who have everybody at the same ability level, and it's a high ability level, are almost certainly being unfair to kids who aren't quite as good. Because, trust me, if you go to some schools and take the C student and compare them to the A+ student in another school, the C student would be a million times better. There we go back to grades being a tremendous source of inequity. In that case, often the inequity, and people say this, it's like, look, we're using grades to help the low ability kids pretend to compete with the high ability kids. And this is where you're talking about standards. There's no solution. Okay, there isn't, without revisiting how we do this. And keep in mind, there's a whole group of people who I don't represent who would say, no, the ability is to end the achievement gap. I'm like, great, okay. And then when you've done that miracle, find world peace. Sorry, Stanley, what's up?
Well, you have talked so long. I've written down more questions.
I'm sorry. I should have shut up sooner.
No. You're a delight.
Thank you.
But I do have 3 questions, and there's some sub questions, and they're probably easy to answer. And Charles, you're gonna love this. I'm going to go to a McWhorter-Lowry thing.
Oh, I love McWhorter and Lowry. I've been on Glenn Lowry's show 3 times.
I saw you.
You did?
I am not horribly to the left of Lowry, but he is horribly to the right of me.
Oh, okay.
Teachers' pets and McWhorter has this thing about back in the day, you used to be called white as a black kid because you were speaking proper English and all this.
Yep.
My background, I went to an all-boys Catholic military school. And when I graduated, out of 100 people, there were 6 black people. And you know what? As a black person speaking whatever English you speak, you get over it quickly, and that's that.
So can I ask you, are you asking about McWhorter's habit of saying he thinks that a lot of the black lack of achievement is that they don't want to be considered like white kids?
It is culture, but I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and that school was in Savannah, Georgia. And I actually think that McWhorter, I think he's overblowing it.
I agree. No, not being black. Okay. I always hesitate to get into this, but first off, one of the things
I'll hand you my black card.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, when I've listened to both Lowry and McWhorter, I like both of them, but I'm a huge fan of Glenn Lowry. I think he's a genius. And he restates things. I wish he was here to restate things because he always kind of takes what I've babbled on and turns it into something like wow, yeah, that's what I said. But in my opinion, first off, I've noticed that they have this kind of bimodal explanation. They're like, poor black kids, they go to crap schools, but middle class kids, it's acting white. I'm like, really? So we have 2 different explanations depending on where your money is, and I'm deeply skeptical of that.
I am too.
and so that I don't think that, and I have met bright kids of every race. I've met
Well, my
just
my point is, you know, and I'm probably older than you, but even back in the day, sometimes even being a nerdy kid, they won't tease you if you know how to respond. And
yes.
I never, yeah, I've been called, hey, you speak white, but you have the right response and they won't do it again. And it
And
doesn't,
what
I think McQuarter overdoes it.
I
Black
agree, and
kids
I
do
have I
not,
every in fact I'm at the point when he starts talking, I'm like I do the little yeah. I mean, like I'm like
yeah,
fast forward because I don't think that's it. I do think I do think there's certain things. For example, if it was up to me, I would say I think some African American quote underachievement might be due to the fact that, and this would not be only blacks, it's just it appears there so we notice it, is I think some kids learn more with concrete and focused and structure, and other kids
right.
learn more abstractly. And I think that we could do more research on that. You don't just want to just do it. I think we need more research, and this is not a learning styles like hippy dippy stuff. I mean, but I do think that we need more research on, like, if we look at kids, like, say, from I quote IQs 80 to 100, how to teach
And
them
that's where I'm going next.
what.
Well, no, please continue. I only have limited time. Charles looks bored.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll stop. All I'm saying is that I think we need more research on looking at kids who don't like. You said, Charles, you asked me what to do with kids who don't learn. I think we need to do more to look at not why they don't learn in terms of teach, like literally I think we need to look at that maybe we need to teach differently depending on what your ability and how you acquire information is, and that's a whole different thing. So
And then my last question, because you've answered
mhm.
most. Um, how familiar are you with Charles Murray?
um I haven't read his most recent book. I do, as I said before, I do believe in smart. I do believe, whether you call, but I'm not an IQ determinist. I don't think like your IQ says who you are or anything like that.
Right.
And I tend to think though that IQ has a lot to do, like if you think of it in tranches, like
Well,
um,
I'm not against, hey, you got two smart parents, you might be smart, but might is the operative word. I've
oh, no.
known,
Again, I went, my father absolutely had a relatively low IQ. I mean, in terms of, this was back when they measured IQ, which they don't do anymore. So, and I do not. I have a very high IQ for what it's worth, which is not much. So, but I do think that if we think of IQ not in terms of like this number or that number, but in terms of what it might say about your ability to acquire information and different ways to do it, I think I could
or
be
find
useful.
what you like.
Yeah. Well, and that again is
I've
the thing,
known,
is that we're trying, again, that is not best served by making everybody take the same classes and go through the same
right,
math and everything else. You know what I mean? And
right.
again though, and this is the problem, is that schools get blamed if they're like, well, this
R-
is what the 80s were. If you go back to the 80s, that was when we said we're going to make more college level classes or college readiness, and let the kids choose it. And then it turned out that there was a racial disparity in choosing them. So you know what they did? They said, we're not going to let you choose. Boom, and take away all the
Well,
lower level
well, may,
classes. And it's you, like what you said, Charles said, it's like we're trying to engineer outcomes. Yes, we are.
well,
And
I
one
kind
thing
of
I just
agree
want to
with
say is,
Charles about engineering outcomes. I'm not comfortable with engineering outcomes. I am comfortable with there's a old Joan Didion novel, or I think it's essays called Play It As It Lays.
yeah.
And I think America actually does that sometimes. But last question, and I'm going to get off. How would you design a school? If
Wow.
you had unlimited budget and all that stuff and could
Okay,
hire
two things.
all the
One, that's a
teachers.
long question, so maybe
Okay.
I can come back and answer that later. But I will say this, and this is important. I do believe that there are equity issues with poor kids and particularly with poor African American kids, in
Well,
terms of it is.
reservation kids, it's
Oh
not.
yeah, not just African American. You're absolutely right. Look, Native American academic performance has plummeted. I mean, just like,
Right.
awfully. So, but my point is that um, the fact that I say intelligence matters, which I think it does, regardless of what the cause of it is, it doesn't mean that I think, oh, it's only that it's a matter of pure determinism. I do think that there are smart kids in poor schools that are not getting what they need and they're getting drawn astray. I do think that poor schools have more trouble with like learning how to handle kids who misbehave, um, and whether or not you have a right to disrupt the classroom. These are critical
Well,
issues. And yet at the
that's the
same time, when
worst.
you take those kids who disrupt the classroom, how do you make sure that they're also getting the education they, if not need, at least some kind of, like, we're not just throwing them to the street? And these are all difficult
Hire the
questions. So
rock
I never want to
and
make it sound too easy.
get him to take the bad kids out.
Well, I truly believe, and in very low achieving schools, that the what I call if you've seen my thing, I talk about low will. I think low will kids, when they reach a certain percentage, make a school unmanageable, and I think that happens a lot in low income schools. And there are other in other words, low test scores doesn't mean a bad school. A bad
Right.
school is one where you have so many low will kids that it's uncontrollable. And I truly believe that those schools, we need
Define
to
low
talk
will.
realistically about how to help those schools.
Can you define low will schools?
Oh, a low will school is when you have a disproportionate amount of kids who are both low will and low skill, both
Mm-hmm.
together. Then you will get a school that is out of control, and then teachers will leave the school, and then you will have subs come in, and then you have one of those dystopian hellholes that you will see, talked about sometimes. Whereas other schools, the schools have low test scores, but if you go in, you see kids working, you see kids
Right.
feeling productive. You know what I mean? They're not the kids are high will, even if they're relatively low skill. But when you have
Right.
low will and low skill and you have too much of a percentage of them, they make the school unmanageable. And this is a serious problem in many high poverty schools.
Chaos. This reminds me, I need to, I wish I looked this up before, but there was a program, I forget where, maybe it was somewhere in Chicago. It was like a pilot program in which they identified the type of students that were basically on the track to go to jail, right?
Yeah.
And and manageable in school. And so they put them in a special class, was basically teaching them how to be cooperative in a way, or and so it would turn out to be very successful, and it was very effective. And it was little like lessons, like, so they would pair two boys together, right? They give one guy a water bottle, and then they say, okay, in this exercise, your job is to, the other guy who doesn't have the water bottle, get the water bottle from the other guy. And so, they would give him 10 minutes, and all the boys wrestle with each other. And at the end, they say, did you try to ask him for the water bottle?
Yeah.
And then that's a revelation. And then they realize, oh, it's not because they never said the other guy would lose if he gave up the water bottle. And so I think there are some kind of cultural aspects of, in these very high poverty places, right? To live in these rough neighborhoods, it's you have to keep up a reputation. You have to know that you're strong. You have to know that you're strong-willed. You're not a pushover. And so those are coping mechanisms that you have to have living in that community. But those things aren't necessarily as conducive in a classroom environment, or if you're going to go on to higher education or to a decent job. Those skills aren't, it's like you have to learn cooperative skills in order to move beyond those things. And
there's first off, I agree second off, there's the famous year 4 of The Wire, for those of you who've seen it. That the Wire is all about year 4 is all about education, and the bunny character says, we need the street kids and the stoop kids, the kids who are out in the street and the kids who are staying close to home and studying and doing their homework. And it's like, first off, you need really good teachers to cover the low will kids. Second, you get huge issues with, forgive me, cultural values and stuff like that. And so those programs tend to be highly controversial. I think they're needed, but it's not as easy as let's just do it, or there'd be more of them,
Yeah.
Who else is here? Stanley, did I answer all your questions? Is he not there? Oh, there you are. So, Mr. Palu, is that it? Did you have a question?
Yes. Yeah, how you doing? How you doing? Nah, I don't have any direct question. I came and listen. I'm a frequent contributor to Charles over the last month, and I listened to the conversation, and that's interesting because I actually live in the state of Maryland. I don't live too far from Baltimore. I live in Prince George's County. I don't know if you know the area. It's east of DC, right?
Yes.
And I like the comment that Chloe's make. I think more programs that are needed because I think the problem is okay. I think one big function of school more than anything that I notice, I believe is socialization. And I think people are not being socialized correctly in the home environment, so they might need school to step in to give people, for lack of a better word, home training sometimes. I mean, so yeah, so cooperation, cause like those type of things, learning how to cooperate, something that you learn with your sister and your cousins and stuff like that, right? But some people,
Yep.
they don't know how to cooperate how regular people would cooperate, unfortunately, because they might come from broken homes or things like that, don't have extended family structures. So it's a socialization issue to me, which I've seen in low income schools. I've been around low income schools. I mean, my school wasn't that bad. I didn't personally go to the worst school in the city, but I know people went to terrible schools, and all they could tell me was horror stories. And then when it breaks down to it, is socialization. If people are better socialized, they'll perform better. Even if they're not the smartest people, the socialization is what makes people perform to their best ability. Even if they don't go to Harvard, they could go to local college or go to whatever. So
No, or even just go get a job, like a union job at Safeway yeah, you're absolutely right. And the problem is that, and by the way, some kids are actually smart, and once they start, once you get them socialized, they can advance. Other kids, they're just going to puddle on. But the fact is that this is a huge issue. And again, generally speaking, those kids are making life living hell for the other kids, the kids who want to learn. And that's a huge, and I have that every so often. Every teacher has that problem. No teacher, if you have a kid who's determined to disrupt your class, Safeway's not a shitty job. It's a good union job. It's like is it good for somebody who's smart enough to go to college? No. But is it good for somebody who wants to advance and become a manager and get benefits and everything else? I would argue I think we're too snobbish about jobs,
No. The teacher thing is because look, I'm gonna tell you first. A matter of fact, I remember DC, right? I remember DC around in the like around. I forgot what year it was, but we had this big issue with the mayor, right? His name was Adrian Fenty. I don't know if you heard the story about Adrian Fenty and
Adrian Fenty brought in Michelle Rhee, and they kicked out Adrian to fire Michelle Rhee. I totally remember that. Yes.
Okay, you remember that? Okay, remember that episode? Okay, I was there when that episode. Matter of fact, I actually had a girlfriend who was working in the school system. She got fired too, and I had some family friends who got fired too because they went around and fired almost those schools. But that was good. I mean, you need things like that because you're right. The unionized school system teaching and them being untouchable, especially okay, I know, and DC is a Democratic stronghold, so like they're connected to the Democratic Party hard. So it was a thing where the school teachers never thought they could get touched, but then he shook it up while going after the teachers union, and that's one thing that they never thought they could get touched in DC. And he actually to me that was one of the things that turned around DC a lot when with that one move, that one shakeup. In the end of the day, it was what they needed. They needed more of it, but of course he lost the mayorcy because of that. That's one of the reasons why he lost the mayorcy. He lost the mayorcy because
it's not one reason; it's the reason he lost it. Yeah, I mean but that's actually significant in and of itself because that means that because, as I recall, Adrian Fenty got the white votes, but not the black votes in DC. And without the black votes in DC, you're kind of screwed. But it's interesting because two things. One, I'm not a Michelle Rhee fan, and the reason why is because Michelle Rhee basically disagreed that there was such a thing as a performance problem. In other words, Michelle Rhee said the teachers have to do everything. So she was at it from a different perspective than I was. And in terms of union teachers, by and large, there's a lot of research, and this is really troubling, but it's true that African American Black students do better with Black teachers on average. And therefore, when she was sitting there firing teachers left and right, it made, and that's another thing too, is that a school, and I think it was Melinda or something was talking about how school is a business. They're not a business, but the fact is, if you go into an African American community, schools are a significant amount of the jobs in that African American community. And the fact is, when Michelle Rhee came in and said, "Hey, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired," that's like making a lot of African Americans out of work. And that was, I think, why a big part of why she got fired. But I would have been in favor of it if she had only focused on getting kids to, saying, look, we've got these kids who want to behave and these kids who are just screwing around. Now, maybe the teacher's not good. So let's get some of our expert teachers, not even expert teachers, but the wranglers, you know what I mean? And get them to kind of take some of these kids and make them smaller classes. And like Chloe says, get them to learn how to cooperate, get them some socialization so that they can start to learn. And again, even having this conversation, there's many people who get upset by it, and I understand it, and I don't know what to do about it, because they're saying, well, basically you're saying it's a kid's problem. I'm like, no, basically I'm saying whatever the kid learned to do to cope with an environment is not going well in school. And if it was only for that kid, it would be, say again?
Let me jump in real quick. I want to jump in real quick. I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm gonna tell you why I liked it. Right? Why I liked it as a local Washingtonian. Why I liked the Michelle Rhee era, because it's. Hello, can you hear me? I'm being heard.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I'm in DC right now. I'm in Georgetown. On M Street in Wisconsin right now. But my thing is this. I think that the field sometimes people need to be able sometimes people need to be able to be scared to lose their job sometimes. It's like if you have a system where you're not afraid to lose you're not afraid of performance, or you think you're entitled to a certain job, especially with the teachers. I mean, it becomes you have a whole system, a culture of complacency. And I think by stopping the system of complacency, it makes people more dynamic.
Yeah. No,
So
I do understand. And that, by the way, Charles said he wanted to have me back to talk about teachers. The whole issues about teacher and job security, which I agree. I mean, look, I know teachers. Look, I was a full-time employee. I was self-employed before I became a teacher. I still work summers. I work this summer. I work all summers. And I know teachers like, oh my God, I work so hard, and I'm looking at them going, really? So I get that. At the same time, there's other issues involved. So when people say that teachers are guaranteed jobs and stuff like that, I don't think it's like that. But I will say this, is that ultimately, Michelle Rhee, there's the issue of teacher performance, and there's the issue of what Michelle Rhee did. And what I was just saying is that I would rather see people work on, I'll put it this way. Michelle Rhee comes from the everybody can learn. Everybody can, set high standards and everybody will learn at the same standard. I am totally not from that mindset. That's my major disagreement with her. Not so much the firing teachers is a separate thing. I don't, I mean, if you have somebody who's really not showing up and doing the work, I'm okay with firing them. But my bigger disagreement was how she approached it was in a different way.
No.
Thank you for your comments, by the way. These are really good comments. Everybody has been doing great comments.
Yeah. So Mike, say something.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going? I
Pretty
just have
good.
a question for Charles, really quick.
Oh, okay.
So it's just kind of something that's kind of been bothering me. It's like, so I understand that you live all the way in Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
But you're making content regarding African Americans. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's your end goal? Like, what are you being paid to do this? Like, what's the deal? Just curious. I'm only asking because I used to be a subscriber, but I noticed like your most recent video was like something about like please stop saving. Like it was like something about like white saviors or something. It's like, bro, what? Like, so like only reason I'm asking, right? So take Nigeria for example, right? Like around 2 weeks ago, there was some conference that Europeans had about like terrorism in Nigeria. Like, so it's getting pretty bad, right? So there's like ISWAP, Boko Haram, and all that stuff, right? So like, you should be making videos about those topics because those are very imminent threats to Nigeria. But you're making topics about African Americans. Like, why?
Okay, should I answer you?
Yeah.
Okay, first off, no one is paying me to do this. I understand why you would want to question why a Nigerian is doing this, being involved in African American issues and issues all the way in the US. I had that feeling too when I started. I was like, why? Why should I be talking about these people that are way across from in another country? I felt uncomfortable. But on the other hand, I looked at it and said that, well, the world is a global village, and I can very well talk about anybody or anything that I want to talk about. And this is what interests me. There is no agenda behind it. There's no particular
Okay.
agenda behind it. There is no sinister agenda behind it. It just interests me. It's for me, it's an intellectual exercise. Talking to people like this is an intellectual exercise, and I get to engage with people like this. If I wanted to talk about
Right. Right. But the
okay,
video.
the two reasons why I don't talk about things in my country. One, for me, it's the issues in my country. It's too close to home. So some of these things are traumatic for me personally. Talking about the Boko Haram issue, talking about the security issue. As it is, I want to be in a headspace where I don't have to worry or bother about those things. So I don't want to bring them into this kind of conversations where I get to talk about those things.
So
So I keep it
you're
aside. For this,
so
this is more like an intellectual exercise for me. There is no agenda behind it. But I felt
really
that, okay, if I'm going to be talking about people in the US, who 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 is closer to me than African Americans in that sense that I could talk about. And starting
can you
it
explain your last video?
ultimately,
If
okay,
if your
ultimately
goal
starting
was
it.
to if your goal was to create an engagement, right? Your last
Mhm.
video makes no sense because you're asserting a statement as if you're going, "Hey, I'm black," kind of thing, and then like, please
May
stop.
I steer
No,
away from this?
no, no,
Like, yes,
no,
dude.
no,
Look,
no, no, Mike.
but you were
That
asserting a point of view, right? That's based on something you have no experience like on. Like you're not a black American, so you shouldn't be able to make that statement.
As a
You
Black
have to.
American, I'm gonna pull the Black American card, otherwise
Right?
known as a race card.
I'm not pulling the race card. I'm just
And
saying he's
I'm sorry.
never.
someone
I'm
did
not
He
laughing
not.
at this
didn't
conversation,
grow
which
up
is
here,
actually
right?
making me nervous. I was laughing at Stanley's comment. Sorry. So,
Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
So I just I just want
I
to know. Like, what's your goal, man?
well,
Like,
Charles
okay.
is the moderator.
Mike, did you see the video I made with Black Skin is amazing, where he
yeah,
asked the question of what
yeah,
gives you the right to
I'm,
talk
yeah,
about
I
these
know
things.
about black skin
And
too.
and you saw my response. My response was, I cannot speak
Charles
for
gets
African
to be the
Americans.
polite
I'm
one.
only
I don't.
But look,
I'm only speaking about. You understand? So I'm not speaking for you. And if that video, if it seemed as if I was speaking for you, it wasn't my intention, and I'm sorry about
that's
that.
what
But
it
that
is. You
wasn't
were
my
pretty
intention.
much saying, "Hey, you
So
guys,
no,
you
no,
guys
no, no.
like,
It was based
Michelle,
on okay. It was based on what I was observing in the internet space, and I made that video based on that, not because I was saying this is what is happening to me. I always put out that Michelle, when we started, didn't I tell you that I'm in Nigeria? I'm not in the US. I always say that all the time. Never been to the US. So there is no agenda
Well,
for me. It
Okay,
is
I have a
purely
question.
an
Hold on,
intellectual
hold on.
exercise.
Wait, all right. I have one more thing.
But anyhow, Mike, can
One
we
last
talk
thing.
about this some other time, because we have
No,
a
wait.
tough
I just have one last thing to say.
actually, I'd love to talk to Mike about this.
No, I just have one last thing to say. So remember when light skin was
An
amazing?
American accent. Is Mike from America?
Yeah, I'm American. That's why I brought it.
Well, you and I should have a good conversation. Why are you colonizing this conversation?
Because I have to ask him this question really quick.
Because of white privilege?
What? Dude, it's all right.
No,
Just let me ask you
dude,
something.
nothing. You're demagoguing.
Charles.
You are doing all the things that we expect from you.
What? Dude, I'm black.
You heard me.
What? All right.
Are you not used to being challenged?
Dude, that's not even my point. Just let me ask
Well,
you.
you have no point. That is my point. I
Okay,
have a question.
cool.
May I ask it?
All right, what's your question?
It's not to you.
Yeah, well, I have one more final question to ask Charles.
Oh my goodness.
Remember when black skin
You
is amazing?
persist.
Dude,
Say again? I couldn't hear you, Mike.
Let him go ahead. Let him go ahead. Go ahead. Finish
I
up.
know, I
Mike.
couldn't hear him.
Finish up.
so your point of view, right, is that the world's a global village, so you have the right to say,
Oh my God.
right? Correct? So I have a question. Are you okay with black skin is amazing saying things like Nigeria should be colonized? Since the world is a global village,
It's his opinion. He can say whatever he wants to say.
But you were offended when
I'm
he
not
said
saying that about.
But you told him that was
I
all
was-
right. You guys debated. Yeah, you did. You did.
I
In
disagreed
fact,
with
you
him.
testified.
It didn't mean I was. It didn't mean I was offended by it. In fact, in that video, I told him that you could try to shame you. You could try to shame me all you want with the problems of my country, and I understand those challenges and those problems. So it doesn't bother me when you say those things. So that was my response. So
All
it
right.
doesn't bother me what he says about my country. Some of the things he said were true. So am I going to kick him and say, "Oh, why are you saying this?" Anyone can say whatever they want to say about anybody.
Can I say something just breaking in? Because Mike, did I, and forgive me if I got this wrong, did I understand you to say that you were black as well?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say as a white person, I found the debate here to be fascinating. If tense, it was fascinating. And I just wanted to say that it's not something that we get to see often. And I'll shut up now.
He's Charles's internet is a little bit shaky, but
yes, I couldn't tell if it was mine or yours. It is, so okay.
Yeah. So I guess from his internet connection is I don't know if I should keep talking, but
yeah, let's let him give a second.
Mike, that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So let's go ahead.
Charles, just so you know, you totally broke up there for like a minute.
Yeah, you totally broke up. But
you totally like we couldn't hear what you said for like a minute.
Here's the thing that I will say, that I think that these conversations are refreshing because it's good to have an outside perspective.
That's what I was going to say.
I think that that's the thing. And so there's actually a YouTube series. I don't know if I can find it anymore. I think the YouTube, I think the person took off their videos, but there was this one series called Walking or Wandering or something like that. And what it was a Black filmmaker, African-American filmmaker, that was basically talking to the African diaspora all over the world. So, she interviewed people in the UK, in France, in Holland, in Italy, all of these different people of African descent, and just trying to figure out, like, how do you feel about things? And it was very interesting to see, like in France, there are no demographics, in terms of race, right? And so how do you deal with that? What are your issues? And it was very apparent that, African American discourse is highly, highly influential all over the world. So in order to understand, or for these people, like in France, they're using, African American thinkers in order to understand their context, but even they were understanding of it doesn't exactly fit their context and how they interact with their country, because they didn't go there as slaves, and so it doesn't quite fit. And so there is a global kind of reckoning with the fact of African Americans are so influential, and to parse, okay, this is what is in the African American context versus my context, is something that the African diaspora does need to wrestle with.
Well, that's actually true. And in fact, one of the things I find somewhat sad is in America, African Americans, using the word literally, or African descendant of slaves or whatever. I forget what the A stands for. I'm sorry. American descendant of slaves. That's what it is. Versus African immigrants. There is actually a lot of times prejudice in favor of African immigrants in schools and everywhere else. And these things create their own tensions, which is kind of what I felt Mike was not so much getting at, but that was what I felt was kind of fueling it in a weird way, if that makes sense. And it was
Hey,
interesting.
you mind if I comment on that? You mind if I jump in? Oh yeah.
I have to go pretty soon. By the way, I am in Florida. Hi, believe it or not, I'm still on the podcast, so I'll call you back in 2 seconds. Okay? I'm starving. Yeah, we'll go. Sorry, I'm in Florida, and I just got here, and my brother, who we're on vacation together, and I got to go eat pretty soon. So I'd love to hear Mr. Pelu's comment, and then if I could leave. And I've had a great time. Thank you all very much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for coming to be with us. Even on vacation. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate your.
Oh, it was fun. I had a great time.
Okay. Yeah. As an African, as an African immigrant in America, I'm an African immigrant in America. I was born in Sierra Leone, and I immigrated to America when I was a child. Right. As an African immigrant in America, I grew up as a black boy in America, but I was an African immigrant. I mean, I see what you might say, because there was a reputation even amongst like whites, like they even told me sometimes that you different because you came here to work. You know what I'm saying? Like I've heard that you're different. You came here to work. I've heard that. I have heard that. I ain't gonna lie. I've heard that. But at the same time, I think there's some validity to that, because there is a systematic complacency in black culture in America that's leading to too much the things that we talked about before, where you need to get home training outside of home. If that's an issue, I mean, it's sad to say, but as somebody who's lived in both worlds, as somebody who's lived black in America, but as an immigrant, I mean, and don't get me wrong, it's like that over in our country too. I mean, we're backwards over there, but the thing about it that is like, unfortunately, what's going on is that the Africans who make it to America are from like the higher stratas of society, more and more than, not always, but more than average.
Yep,
you know what I'm saying? The more than average, that is, because the average poor Sierra Leonean, a lot of them might even be literate and not gonna be able to make it over here. So the few people that have some type of skills to make it over here, like being able to speak English and things like that, are the fastest ones coming here. They come from a more for lack of a better word, developed environment, even within Africa. So that should come from a more developed environment. Even like for example, both my parents were college educated, and they were born and raised in Africa their whole life. You know what I'm saying? My grandparents were college educated on my dad's side. My mom's side, no, but even my mom's side, my grand uncles, they were college educated. So it wasn't like I came from a background where, you know what I'm saying? I came from a background in many ways that had more advancement than a lot of African Americans. So what happens is, it just, I mean, what's going on is that what happened there was a big disconnect in communication between the African Americans coming over here, African American in here, and the only way to do this is to have conversations like this to build the connections, and like people like me who grew up here, so who's in both worlds, like it's going to take more than it's going. I mean, first generation immigrants not going to be fully assimilated to what's going on perfectly in America. First generation, it's going to take one or two generations, and I'm sure that same thing happened with white people, the different white groups from the Irish to the Italians to wherever
Yeah.
came. So I mean, it's gonna take these discourses to heal those issues, but everybody got a lot to learn from the situation. That's what I gotta say. Thanks a lot.
No, I
All
just
right.
want to say again, my brother's sitting there staring at me saying it's time to eat, so I really have to go. But I was just saying, Charles, I didn't know. The reason I brought it up is because I could be totally wrong, but that was kind of the vibe I got from the conversation. I think Mr. Pelu kind of said what I was thinking, but I just said that because I'm not sure you know that because you're Nigerian, so you might not. I don't know if you know of the tension, that happens that Mr. Pelu just beautifully described. And everything you say I agree with. I wasn't making it sound like it's some cosmic unfairness. I don't know what to do about these, but I really do have to go. And it's been a wonderful 2 hours. My God, it's been 2 hours. Charles, did you have any last? I wanted to turn it over to you, but I do have to go. Did you have any other questions for me?
One last question. I'll put it on the
Okay.
screen from Stanley. Just this last question before you leave. Yeah.
Oh, first, yes. Yes, America does. That is why we do it. That's why America invests. That's why America doesn't do things like say, you're not good for college, you're not good for high school, you can't take advanced classes. That's why we are. And in fact, whenever, like I saw a lot of comments here, people saying, well, you just need to repeat it, or hey, if you can't do it, let's go. This is what you were saying, Charles. Like America, more than anybody, and even if we screw up at it, and we do, we're not perfect. Even if we screw up at it, we absolutely believe in it. And America has always, from our founding, invested. And of course, the tragedy is that we didn't always invest equally by race. But even there, we did a lot more of it than other countries did, even though, as I said, we failed at it shamefully. And, we are trying to rectify that now. But yes, America values education for non-elites. However, last comment, there is absolutely true that we're now at the point where some people get more out of education and more like money, than others. And how we work with that is, and how we say, well, what is it we're trying to instill in all of our students versus how come some students can go and, get great grades and therefore get into a great college and therefore make a ton of money and other kids don't. And how we deal with that is again attention. And by the way, there's a lot of books about this. There's a lot of good education analysis books where they go into that sort of thing. The art, I'll write his name down. I don't know how to do comment. David Labar, this guy right here. He writes a lot about that. David Labar. I don't know if people can see it. If you can put it up there, he's a guy. And again, if you read, there's there's certain podcasts and stuff that talk about this stuff in a way if you're interested. But as I said, I do have to go. I sorry to leave, but it is 2 hours and 17 minutes. That's got to be some kind of record for me in talking. I talk a lot, but I've really enjoyed it. And I thought everybody made great comments. And thank you so much for having me. And if you're interested in having me back, I would certainly be up for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for coming. Definitely, I would love to have you back again. So
Well,
we'll
thank
share
you.
the fun and have another conversation.
Okay.
So have a
Bye-bye.
bye.
How do I leave? Oh, there it is. Bye-bye, guys.
Hey,
So, Mike.
maybe I came off too strong. So here's my point of view, right? Like why I was asking you that question, right? So you're familiar with Ken Owens and all those
With what?
You're familiar with Candace Owens, right?
Yeah, I am.
Right, and people of her type, pretty much like
Yeah.
black Republicans being used to regurgitate right wing talking points, right? They're pretty much figureheads. So
Mhm.
from my point of view, I thought that you're pretty much that because I started noticing in your comments you would have random like I'm not gonna say this, but suspect people, right? Who frequent your channel, right? So clicked on their profiles and it's like people who follow like Thomas Sowell, and he's pretty much like Candace Owens, like what, right?
Hey,
So
I follow Thomas O for the record.
what's that?
I said, I follow Thomas Sowell for the record. I follow
I
Thomas
don't
Sowell. I
disagree with
follow.
him as a person, but I don't disagree with him and his ideas. But I hate how right wingers like to use him as like a gotcha moment kind of thing. Like,
Okay, Mike, can I just come in?
yeah,
Let me just say something. Now, one of my biggest fears in doing this, which is something that I always have at the back of my mind, is to be seen as if I'm a
honestly,
prop
my
for
my view is that you were being paid to do this, so I just wanted to know if you're.
right wingers. And so that's for right wingers or for conservatives or for Republicans, which is totally not true. Which is, as in, if you could look at my heart, if you could see my heart, you would. That was why I was kind of hurt when you asked the question that am I being paid? I mean, I'm supposed to be sleeping now, but I'm doing this because I love doing this because I love intellectual discussions. And I love that I'm able to connect with people from all over the world, people that I don't even know physically, and we're able to talk about these things. It's interesting to me. So there is absolutely no motive behind this, no nothing
So
at all.
here's my
It's just
question:
what I love doing.
are you
So
aware that
so it's
White House are trying to get a
so even those guys you're talking about, the Candace Owens and the rest, I don't listen so much to. I don't know if you've seen one of our conversations. I said I don't listen so much to conservative people because at a certain point I'm like, okay, I've heard this before. Let me just move on. I am for. If you look at the format of my live streams, I like to bring in anybody that wants to come in here. Let us have a discussion. Of course, obviously, I have my own positions. I have my own positions, but I'm not going to impose it on anybody. And we're going to try to exchange ideas to see, okay, what's the merit of your position? What's the merit of my position? That is it. If I wanted to bring in people that I agree with and we just come here and shake ourselves, then I would have restricted who can come into the platform. My last live stream, I brought in a guy, Marcos. We're basically fighting each other on my one of the videos, and he came over. I let him in. The same thing with Black Skin is amazing. He made a video about Glenn, and I made a comment on the video about Glenn, and basically he started with insulting me. He was just insulting me, and then he challenged me to a debate and all that.
yeah.
Okay, fine. Let's talk about it. And I went to his channel. Insulted and issues. The things you are saying, I know some of them are true, and even if they're not true, you have a right to say whatever you want to say. I'm not going to get offended by it. You get, and even when he was being disrespectful to me on my channel, I never kicked him out. I only did that when he was disrespecting my other guests. So I had to let him go. And I brought him back again for another live stream. And so that is the kind of person I am. Absolutely nothing sinister about this. It's just
But
talking,
you have
having
to.
intellectual, not a lot of things, not a lot of
Hey,
things
you mind if I jump in real
appeal
quick?
to me. Yeah, go
You mind
ahead.
if I jump in real quick? You
Go
mind if I say
ahead.
this real quick? Yeah, I just want to say to Mike. I just want to say to Mike quick. Okay, is it acceptable for you to be black and have right wing positions? Is it even acceptable to you? Like I understand. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Look.
Pretend Charles
Look.
or anybody does have right wing positions, but they're black. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I never said you couldn't, right? So my main. So here's maybe I didn't explain why I care so much about it. So I'm a
Hey,
unit believer.
I hate to butt in. Mike, can you turn up your volume? Because I can barely hear you. I can hear everyone else good, but I can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Well, it's volume. Maybe I'm out of step, but I would love. I think Mr. Pelou asked you a great question,
Yeah, that's what I was
and
asking.
I'm not against black conservatives. I just need smart black conservatives, and they are rare.
I never said that I don't support. I don't think someone can. I never said that you couldn't be black and
So I want to hear smartness.
what? What you talk? All right. Anyways,
No, that's a legitimate thing to hear. That's a legitimate thing to want to hear. I mean, because people
so
should talk to sense. You're right.
so I never said that you couldn't be black and a right wing. In fact, me personally, I'm conservative, both socially and politically.
My
But I wouldn't call
point
myself a right wing.
is let's hear the smartness.
What are you talking about, dude? What? The smartness. Anyways, so
Okay, may I
the
ask you
reason.
questions?
What's your question, bro?
Well, we just talked about education. How do we educate our kids to be smarter?
What is being
And
smart?
you and I probably grew up rather lucky. I did, but how do we the people that are here, the kids, and Glenn Lowry talks about culture a lot. How do we change our culture? And I'm going to tell you right now, I think Lowry's wrong about culture. Black culture is American culture, which a bunch of people haven't understood since, oh, I don't know, about 1865. So let's start with educating Black children and bring them up to speed.
I mean,
From
what you're saying is good, right, Stanley? What I would say to that is that you're exactly right. Blacks have to know that they're part of they're integral part of the American nation. I think the American right has to make blacks a special interest. You know how we have special interest for everything else. We need black special interest because the black American situation is a special interest to the American nation state. So you're absolutely right, and I think it should be looked as a nation state thing, and it's a special interest. The blacks have a certain characteristics that need to be dealt with in the
I,
American
dis-
national context.
I actually disagree with that. Um, Oddly enough, but um, do you understand? And this is kind of a general question, and it might be a bigger issue. I'm going to let you go, Mr. Pelou, because I think you're on the right track. But the problem with America is, I think the Enlightenment made it awfully complicated. The Enlightenment specifically created black and white. And yes, there are books that will explain it. And we're still trying to untangle the bullshit that people like John Locke created. And Thomas Jefferson specifically strung along.
No,
And I know
No,
that's a tangle, but I can draw straight lines.
hey, Stanley. And what you have to understand is this: is that time people learn in time. Well, how people thought then is going to change now, but we have to be able to understand the history of our intellectual tradition. That was part of the intellectual tradition, whether we like it or not. It shaped the Western
The
American society.
Enlightenment invented racism.
I know,
Literally.
part of intellectual history. It's part is a racism is an authentic part of our intellectual history because it actually happened in human thought.
So if a system of philosophy like Locke, who wrote the South Carolina state charter before it was a state, he imported and approved slavery. Thomas Jefferson was a huge Enlightenment fan. So, and I don't mean to fuss, but
No,
can
no, no, no. Because look, I'm gonna give an example, Stanley. Like for example,
Yeah,
the
got it.
abolitionist movement come out. You have the see enlightenment. It didn't stop. The Enlightenment didn't stop God. It didn't stop people looking. It didn't stop people looking at God, and by looking at God, seeing the common humanity. 'Cause even Enlightenment, we have things like abolition. Well, how would you explain the abolition movement? Where did the abolition movement come? Like I come from the abolition
Okay.
movement. They come from Black loyalists. So what about the
Yes,
abolition
sir.
movement? What about capitalism? What about
How
Adam
many
Smith?
abolitionists wanted to live in America with Black people? What did William Lloyd Garrison want to do? What did Lincoln want to do? Did they want,
I'm
did
Sierra
they
Leone. I'm from the sister
accept,
country of Liberia.
did
As
they
a matter of fact, it
accept
took
a
them to
land
Liberia.
that could be Black and white?
Man, I'm a product of that system. I come from the
Not
first.
the abolitionists.
Yes, I am. I'm from Freetown, Sierra Leone. I'm from the first. I'm an authentic, original Sierra Leone Creole. I'm one of the people that sent back from the slave trade. I'm a returnee. I'm actually a Black returnee. My whole family are Sierra Leone Creoles, the Black returnees who settled in Sierra Leone.
Well,
So
then you have read Abraham Lincoln, right?
I mean, I read a lot of him. I'm familiar.
And Marcus Garvey. I'm not ever sure. Well, have you wait, Thomas Jefferson didn't want slavery. But what did Thomas Jefferson really want once slavery was ended? And I'm talking here in the US. Did they want a joint society? Did they want multiculturalism, or did they want to ship the slaves back over? And Marcus Garvey wanted it too.
I'm the original returnee. I'm the original back to Africa, and I'm one
Hey
who went
guys,
back
In which century?
in
Stanley,
1787.
Mr.
1787. It was,
Stanley, Mr.
I'm from
Stanley,
the
we're
Black
going.
loyalist. I'm from the Black
Hello, guys.
loyalist.
So
Huh?
we're going out. We're going
And where are
off topic
you
right now.
living now?
So we can
And why am I living now?
Stanley.
I'm living in
Mr. Pelu,
Washington D.C. right now. I'm in Washington D.C., USA, the capital of America. I'm in the
Yeah.
capital of America.
Okay.
I think I could.
Ask you a simple question. I know I'm over talking.
hello,
Did
guys.
did Abraham Lincoln think that Black and white
Stanley.
people could live together?
Chloe, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
It means Stanley and Mr. Pelu can hear me. So please, let's not take this conversation somewhere else again. Let's just try and wrap up in the next few minutes. We can talk about this some other time. And Mike, well, I don't want to talk about Mike now since he isn't here, but I'm feeling a bit hurt with that charge and accusation. But water on the bridge, I'll get over it. So let's just wrap up.
Charles, what
Wrap up
exactly
things.
did he say that hurt your feelings?
Am I getting paid for this?
Oh, hell no. Don't worry about that.
Yeah,
So
it's something that it feels like it's very common, if if you're colluding with the enemy. And literally today, this is I watched a video talking about other left kind of YouTube channels and how they're all kind of currently attacking each other. You're a paid shill, you're a paid shill, you're a paid shill if anyone disagrees with them. And so that's kind of, and I don't know, it kind of seems like it's a common go-to in terms of you're saying something I disagree with, you must be paying paid, because no free thinking person would ever willingly hold certain opinions because it goes against an interest of mine. Now, I'm not saying, you know, Mike specifically is, you know, like at least that far in terms of conspiratorial thinking, but like politically in America, that is a common, like, I don't know, it's accusing people of being a bad faith actor, essentially.
So I learned some things about the American educational system today, because it always used to bother me that, okay, if the standards are the same, um, why is affirmative action needed to bring in people who are not meeting certain criteria into certain schools? I mean, it was a whole mess in my head, and now Michelle has cleared it up for me that, well, there are really no enforceable standards either from the federal government or the state government or from the district. That's majorly at the
Well,
discretion of the teacher.
wait. That's merit. If you're saying what I thought I just heard you say, it's merit, correct? You earn your way into a school, or did I get that wrong?
No, no, you didn't get that. What I was trying to say is that how because I hear Glenn Lowry say this a lot, that students are being mismatched with schools. I mean, you go to a school and maybe affirmative action brings in some students into a certain school, and they are not being able to keep up because it's above their skill level, and then they
But
drop out.
Yeah,
So
and
I
also,
so
that's
I
charter
I begin to
school.
ask myself.
That's merit.
So I
That's
begin
his.
to ask
That's
myself,
Lowry's argument. Merit.
merit. Yes, yes. So this is where I'm driving
And
at. My point is, why should there be different cadres of school in the first place? I mean, why should there be? It didn't make sense to me that there are different cadres of school that people can go based on their skill level. I thought that
merit.
the standards would just be there. If you can meet it, then
Merit.
you get into that school. Yeah, merit.
yeah,
But if you
Merit.
can't,
but sometimes, you know, like for some Ivy League schools, like I'm pretty sure, like Stanley, have you seen that Black Lives Matter a letter that was sent out in a particular Texas district to a bunch of white parents?
No, but I would love for you to send it to me. But
Okay.
but
It's
I really feel strongly about this. What Charles is talking about is merit.
what so
Black
are
students, white students, it doesn't matter. You have to be smart enough to get where you go. And that's kind of an English system, A levels. And I don't understand the English system, but I guess I'll stop there because
so are you
merit is
saying,
what you're talking about.
yeah, are you saying you are for merit, but you're not for just placing people
No,
in a
I
high.
think I think merit should be part of the system, but it shouldn't be everything.
Well,
Because I seriously, I knew a white dude, blonde haired, blue eyed white dude who took um, remedial English his first 2 years of college and wound up being a comparative lit major at Yale and wrote a movie. He literally got that good. And
yeah,
he could have had bad parents and probably did, but it doesn't really matter about, and we grew up in the same city, didn't go to the same school, but um Charles, you're right. However, America is so wound up on merit, and then merit winds up into who can pay for SAT prep. It's way more complicated than just merit.
but
And really, that's my point.
so I guess I will push back a little bit. In some people who basically get into like really prestigious schools, right? And that's what the letter was basically saying. You know, it's like this is from BLM, and it's like, hi, you are a white parent of you're very rich neighborhood, and maybe don't put your kids into elite. You don't get your kids to apply to elite schools. Those spots should be for people of color. So basically, telling the
No,
parents.
but the system doesn't work that way.
I know. But like this is the angle this is basically what this group was
Oh, I
trying
see
to.
where you're going.
Yeah, this is what this group was trying to say. It's like, if we just get all of these rich white people to take their kids out,
Oh,
and then they just fill it up with black kids, then they will be successful.
no.
And so I guess we're on the same page that we all disagree with that. And so I think that there are some black people who do believe that, like, this is the way to do it. If you just get a kid in Harvard, he's going to be set, right? But it doesn't work like that, because you're going to be around other really high achieving people,
Yes.
and you're going to feel alienated. You're going to be in Boston.
Well,
You're going to be
may I-
around people of a different class, and people feel alienated from that sense, and then they
well,
drop out.
class is a problem,
Mhm.
but you're an engineer. I actually majored in a science myself, and
Chemistry, right?
a biochemistry actually. I have a high achieving child, but I'm a black man, and any parent, white, black, purple, you don't just send your kids to school. And I hope my son gets into the Naval Academy. But that's why I was gonna ask, does America really value education? I've never gotten that impression.
So yeah, I agree with your concerns. So
Okay, guys,
sorry.
I have to go now. So let's just last words for now, Stanley. Last words, Chloe, so that we can wrap this up.
Okay, I think I'll just start. I do think that, I guess, the standards issue might be, it seems like it's a different conversation depending on if you're talking about elementary school, middle school, high school, and definitely college. All of those kind of pose a different context to the question, and make it adds complexity every single layer that you go up. And so I do think the standards, because they kind of may get more mushy at certain levels, and then also you add on the level of home involvement, the home environment, and that variability, that makes the situation very messy in terms of education, and the gap as to where can you pin this on. And it is multifaceted, it seems like.
All right. Thank you, Chloe. Stanley.
Well, I just think let's all hope we can survive Charles Murray, because he seems to be rather popular. And I agree with IQ, but not the way it's measured. And certainly not the way someone like a Charles Murray would measure it. Charles, you saw Charles Murray's interview with Glenn Lowry, right?
Yeah, I did.
His whole thing is he doesn't think America, US specifically, is racist. He doesn't think that Black poverty is caused. He doesn't think America is racist, and that is his tent pole. So he wants to prove that it is on Black people. He literally kind of got that point across. So America's not racist, so it must be on Black people's IQ, and that is his reason for writing the bell curve. And I think that is so wrong. I think that's lazy. I think it is 1876.
Okay, can I comment on that?
Yes.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right, because
And I want to add one quick caveat. Who is Black in America?
Okay, let me finish. So that was one of the feelings I got from the interview. I think he was doing the exact, it's the flip side of what the left is doing, where the left says it's all racism, and he just flips it and says it's all Black people. You understand? And
Intellect
both
and
positions are wrong.
culture.
Yeah, both positions are wrong. It's not all racism, and it's not all based on Black people's behavior or culture.
It is a
There's a lot of, it's a mix of so many things. So that's what I got from that, and I was wondering why he would come to that kind of conclusion. Probably he was just trying to push back on that it's racism narrative, and just singled it down to that one single point. But that's for another conversation anyway. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for coming to the
May I
live
ask you a
stream.
question?
Yeah.
Why would Charles Murray come to that conclusion?
I have no idea. The first time I saw Charles Murray,
Well,
first and
that's
only
an
time
interesting
I saw
thing.
Glenn Lowry.
Let's have him on your program. I bet he would come.
I don't know. Well, if he did come, I'm
I'll
going to
ask
push
him.
back on those very tough, on those very those points.
What?
I'm going to push back on
Okay.
those points. So
What would
anyway,
he do if a bunch of Black people asked him, "Why did you come up with that conclusion?"
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if we had like a book club and read his book and everything like that, and then
I've
if he
read the
had the
Bell
interview.
Club.
Yeah, I haven't. So I'm not.
Oh,
gonna.
you should do it.
When I have time. Pretty busy. Yeah.
all right, guys. Thank you for coming. So see you in the next live stream.
Thank you,
Bye,
Charles.
guys.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night.
Yeah.